Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. The spinning wand gradually slowed and dropped to the ground. Innsburn's eyes widened in surprise. She scanned the area, trying to locate them. But the tide of battle had already shifted. Saber poured mana into her silver sword. Crimson lightning crackled along the blade. It wasn't a full true name release. But it came dangerously close in power. The blade suddenly swelled to twice its normal length and cleaved through the obsidian gravity dome created by Midgecraft, sinking into Berserker's back like a knife through mud. Berserker let out a voiceless roar and swept his stone sword at Saber. But her reinforced armor took the hit. Die already. Gritting her teeth through the force of the blow, Saber kept pressing forward, slicing inch by inch through Berserker's body like she was sawing through solid rock. Both servants roared in defiance. A flash of red light. Blood sprayed. Saber dropped to one knee. Berserker fared worse. His body had been cleaved diagonally from shoulder to waist, the cut bisecting him completely. His lower half still stood in place. His upper half tumbled to the ground. The red glow in his eyes faded. The mark of his death. Saber spat blood from her mouth, staggered to her feet, and was about to confirm the kill. When she saw something impossible. The blood on the ground began to flow in reverse, as if time itself were rewinding, returning to the body. Not just the blood. The severed upper half of his body began to rise, slowly, as if drawn by magnetic force, drifting back toward the lower half. He's not dead. No. This bastard can revive. Saber instantly grasped what was happening. This wasn't self-healing. It was a noble phantasm. A resurrection curse triggered the moment of death, as if rewriting Kality itself. Saber. Get back. Sakura's voice rang out from behind. Turning, Saber saw the 2 sisters standing at a safe distance. Her wand suddenly shot back into her hand with a spin. Sakura had used imaginary number space to pull Rin out of Berserker's range just in time. Feeling distant magical energy locking onto her position, Saber cursed under her breath and leapt back toward Sakura, where the 2 sisters pulled her down into a naturally formed trench for cover. Master, did you see that? That Berserker is totally cheating. He just won't die. Saber complained to Sakura. We can talk about it later. Brace for impact, Rin said, shielding her head with her arms. Eh? Saber blinked in confusion. Sakura raised her wand, casting a mana shield that enveloped the 3 of them. The next moment, an arrow streaked across Fuyuki's night sky like a meteor, aiming straight for the freshly revived Berserker. The arrow struck, transforming the cemetery into a field of molten earth. A massive crater tore open at the point of impact, as if a meteor had slammed down. That had to be Archer's noble phantasm, Saber thought. But the problem was, even after a blow that powerful, undoubtedly A rank, Berserker was still standing. When the 3 regrouped to assess the aftermath, they couldn't tell whether that strike had actually killed him or not. Berserker's ability is bizarre, Sakura said. If he can revive even after being killed like that, we'll be the ones drained first. Rin glanced at the motionless Berserker and guessed, he probably hasn't finished recovering yet. Looks like we need to fall back for now. She'd just witnessed her sister's Midgecraft firsthand. With the imaginary number space, not even Berserker could chase them. TCH. I guess we have no choice, Saber muttered, her shoulder still aching from a slight dislocation that would need time to heal. Sakura stood and addressed Innsburn. That's an impressive servant. Looks like we won't settle this tonight. Let's pick it up another time. With that, she swung her wand, and the 3 of them vanished. Imaginary number Midgecraft. Innsburn was a step too late to interfere and could only watch them leave. Something's definitely off. Is Innsburn's servant immortal? After the battle, Denkai Shiomi repeatedly replayed the final moments, confirming that Berserker had revived twice. Maybe it's some kind of immortality curse, Morgan said lazily. Like your master's. She lay stretched out on the bed, her porcelain skin flushed pink, a sheen of sweat glistening across her flawless back. She looked completely at ease. My master's case is different. Still, Saber and Archer's noble phantasms definitely killed Berserker. Twice, Shiomi replied, sighing. Morgan's comparison wasn't entirely wrong. Retreating was the right move. Otherwise, they might have gotten caught in a war of attrition, and we'd be the ones running out of steam first. Sakura's decision had been wise. All Insburn needed to do was stall them. Wear down Sakura and Ren's servants until they collapsed. Even with a command spell to call Archer back, survival chances would have been slim. Morgan climbed onto Shiomi's back, resting her chin on his shoulder. So what's the plan? The Holy Grail War's more dangerous than I expected. We can't stay at this hotel in Shinto anymore, Shiomi said, turning to pull the naked Morgan into his arms. We need to move somewhere closer to Sakura. And not just that. There were definitely others watching tonight's fight, through familiars or servants. With all participants now summoned, Shiomi knew caution was essential. Ideally, he'd gather intel on every other servant before reuniting with Sakura. Why not just join the Holy Grail War outright? Morgan suddenly suggested. Sakura's probably gone home by now. We still have time to catch up. You serious? Shiomi cupped her face, gently stroking it. I'm joking, Morgan caught his hand. Whatever you decide, I'll be with you. The Fourth War was supposed to be my end. Everything now is just a bonus. Shiomi ran his fingers through her soft hair, and Morgan tilted her head, savoring the touch. Still, just like I thought. Peaceful life doesn't suit you. The battlefield's where you belong, my husband. Hard to argue with that, Shiomi admitted. Years at the clock tower had nearly dulled his edge. Don't worry. Even if we're up against thousands, I'll fight by your side. Even now, you're saying that. As long as you understand. Chapter 153, a little way down the hillside from Fuiuki Church, deep within the forest, stood a Western-style mansion. Few ever ventured there. Most of Fuiuki's residents had only heard rumors of the place, and those few curious enough to seek it out ended up getting lost, inexplicably emerging elsewhere without ever finding it. But the mansion did exist. It was said to be the property of the Edelfelt family, a renowned magecraft lineage from Finland. Ever since the Third Holy Grail War, when the Edelfelt sisters turned against each other and suffered defeat, the family had not returned to Fuiuki. Their estate had since been entrusted to the Mages Association for safekeeping. Now, the mansion served as a temporary residence for a Holy Grail War participant dispatched by the Mages Association. Bazit Frogem Kremitz. Bazit had arrived in Fuiuki one day before Sakura. Using a runestone earring, she summoned her servant, Lancer, and began a comprehensive investigation of the city before all the masters and servants had assembled. So, when tonight's battle occurred outside Fuiuki Church, it was no surprise that Bazit and Lancer took notice. Cautious as ever, Bazit didn't rush to the scene. Instead, she had Lancer already out on reconnaissance. Go check the situation while she observed the battlefield through the shared senses between master and servant. Unbelievable. I told you not to act until we had intel on all the masters, didn't I? And you still found time to go shopping? How carefree can you be? Through Lancer's eyes, Bazit saw the unfolding battle. What she didn't expect was that he hadn't returned immediately. Instead, he'd stopped by a nearby 24-hour convenience store. I'm not dumb enough to get caught, okay? You should eat something too, Bazit. If you keep living off canned food, you'll never grow tall. Lancer shook the shopping bag in his hand with a helpless sigh. I appreciate the gesture. But from now on, consult with me before doing anything on your own. Bazit took the bag from him. During the first 3 days, she'd been thrilled. After all, she had summoned the hero she'd admired since childhood, the Child of Light, Kuchilane. But it didn't take long for him to shatter her illusions. For the 7 days leading up to the Holy Grail War, Bazit had been in a constant state of disorientation and frustration. In that sense, she was quite in sync with her servant. Still, those 7 days weren't wasted. After eliminating the Mages Association observers, Lancer uncovered a servant who was secretly murdering civilians and using their souls as fuel to restore power. That servant was Assassin, who possessed presence concealment. And since there was no immediate reason to engage, they hadn't found an opening to catch him. In the past few days, Fuiuki's news had already reported multiple murder cases. Let's set that aside. How was the situation at the church? Hard to say. Lancer plopped down and waved his hand. Saber and Archer were fighting at first, but their masters seemed to know each other, so they stopped halfway through. Then Berserker showed up, and the two of them teamed up against Berserker's side without missing a beat. I already know that. Bazit frowned. I'm asking for your opinion. How strong were the 3 servants that appeared tonight? Lancer thought for a moment, then shrugged. Didn't fight them myself, but they all looked solid. Especially that Archer. He was swinging a sword around and holding his own against Saber. As for Berserker, he looked like the kind of guy you can't just kill off easily. If we're going to fight him, we'll need to be fully prepared. My thoughts exactly, Bazit said. Based on the intel we have, the three masters should be from the Insburn, Tasaka, and Shiomi families. Insburn and Tasaka can wait, but we need to pay close attention to Saber's master. Huh? Why? Don't tell me you know her? Lancer looked confused. Something like that, Bazit nodded. Her father used to be a sealing designation executor. By the time I joined the Mages Association, he had already stepped back from the front lines. Bazit had become a sealing designation executor in 1996, after the Fourth Holy Grail War. At that time, Denkai Shiomi was gaining fame for having taken down a Lord of the Clock Tower during the war. Bazit never got the chance to meet him, but she'd heard his name praised from all directions. Oh? So she's the daughter of an old-timer? Lancer grinned. More than that. Even though he's retired, among us executors he's still considered the strongest. No contest, Bazit said frankly. They say he's a master of rune magecraft and can even use a few of the original runes, the kind barely anyone can decipher. Oh. Lancer sounded intrigued. So you're saying we'd better keep an eye on his daughter too, huh? Exactly. Bazit stood up. From what we can tell, all the servants have probably already been summoned. Starting tomorrow, I'll head out and conduct field investigations myself. Lancer perked up. Oh? So my master's finally ditching the sit-tight strategy and taking the fight to them. Lancer, are you seriously that naive? Bazit was clearly annoyed. Now that all the servants are here, clashes like tonight's are going to keep happening. When they do, we need to strike. Catch them off guard. So basically, you're saying we're jumping straight into a battlefield mess. Sounds perfect? Right up my alley. Lancer was fully on board. You really have no sense of planning. Bazit sighed, exasperated. The fight outside the church had undoubtedly drawn attention from more than just their faction. All sides were surely on the move, operating in secret. Isn't that the perfect counterbalance for your style? Lancer replied casually. Lancer remained neutral toward everyone. Enemy or ally. Not even his own master was an exception. That was just how he was. Friends one day, enemies the next. Enemies today, allies tomorrow. He was the kind of man who'd fought to the bitter end in times like those. After spending the past week or so learning that all too well, Bazit knew she couldn't expect Lancer to fully align with her mindset or tactics. Fair enough. She grabbed some food from the shopping bag, ready to recharge after another sleepless night. Chapter 154, Sorry to keep you waiting. Hop in. Early the next morning, Shiomi brought Morgan along to retrieve his car, which had been stored in Shinto. He had originally planned to keep it at home, but thinking it might be inconvenient if he ever needed it on short notice, he'd decided to store it before moving the whole family to London. It wasn't a long wait. Honestly, watching you interact with people while I waited was kind of entertaining, said Morgan, sitting in the lounge area of the shop. She set down her coffee cup as Shiomi approached. They got into the car parked outside and headed for Mama Town. Since he wanted to be closer to Sakura, Shiomi had scrapped the idea of staying in a hotel during the Holy Grail War. A rented place wouldn't be suitable for setting up the proper magical workshop anyway. Renting out an entire floor, like Kenneth had done 10 years ago, just wasn't cost-effective. If it were me, I'd just evacuate the civilians and blow up the whole building instead of storming in head-on. That's what Garrett Sugumiya had once said during a conversation on their way to Germany to pick up Hira. Crude and violent as it sounded, Shiomi had to admit that any megas worth their salt would probably survive such an explosion. Still, the idea lingered in his mind this time. Then again, Garrett Sugu had also praised Shiomi's precision in combat, likening it to a surgical decapitation. Which, in hindsight, may have just been mutual flattery. You know, the shop folks were just singing your praises, Shiomi said with a grin. Oh? They said things like, your wife clearly isn't an ordinary person. He chuckled. But don't take it too seriously. They were just trying to push their inventory and convince me to sell this car and buy a more expensive one. Morgan glanced at Shiomi's profile and smiled, her mood lifting. They were complimenting me, so why are you the one so happy? You already know the answer to that. Fair enough. She tilted her head. So, where's the new base? It's about 3 blocks from my old house. A place about the same size as the Emiya residence, Shiomi replied, thinking back. 5 years ago, I happened to see a listing from the real estate agency, asked about it, and bought it. 5 years ago? Morgan looked surprised. I figured once Sakura and Karan were adults, they'd probably need to come back to Japan from time to time. They'd need some personal space. Sakura's a year older, so I originally bought it with her in mind. It's not on a ley line like the Tosaka place, but the surrounding area is good, and it can still tap into the Fuiuki ley line pretty effectively. Since when did you start thinking like a magus? Morgan asked. Not like. I am a magus, Shiomi raised his eyebrows. And Sakura's one too. Of course I have to consider things from a magus's perspective. Morgan nodded slightly. So you didn't tell me about this when we went to England 5 years ago. You weren't interested. Shiomi gave a half laugh, half sigh. You're not about to scold me for wasting money, are you? Not at all. I didn't even bother digging into your relationship with that puppeteer. Why would I care about something like this? Morgan rested her hand elegantly on the car window, propping up her head. Even if I handed you control of an entire country's finances, I'd trust you with it. No thanks. That kind of job clearly isn't for humans. Just tapping on an abacus all day would kill me, Shiomi muttered. I'm fine just managing the household. Morgan didn't argue, but pointed out, you didn't say you couldn't do it. How would I know if I've never tried? Morgan smiled again at that. As the car crossed Fuiuki Bridge and wound its way through Mama Town, turning left and right, they caught sight of Sakura and Rin waiting at a traffic light. Looks like they're heading to school together, Morgan remarked. They've probably already formed an alliance, Shiomi replied, his voice softening with some relief. Compared to other masters, a blood-related sister is probably more trustworthy. Not necessarily. Being family could also mean she is even more dangerous, Morgan said with a sly look at Shiomi. You know what kind of samples to reference. Shiomi let out a wordless sigh, shutting his eyes tight for a moment before slowly opening them again. The red light turned green, and as traffic resumed, he turned the steering wheel left, taking a road opposite the direction of Hamura Academy. What are you looking at, Sakura? We're about to cross. Rin tugged lightly on Sakura's sleeve. It's nothing. I just thought the car that passed looked a lot like my dad's. Sakura turned her gaze away, but not before glancing one last time. It was rush hour and traffic was heavy, the car she saw had long disappeared into the crowd. Maybe you've been away from home for a while and are starting to miss your family, Rin teased. Maybe. Sakura thought her sister was probably right. It had been over a week since she last talked to her father. Maybe that's why she was imagining things. The two walked through the bustling crowd, Mordred trailing behind them in a suit. Archer, in spirit form, followed from above. It was a school day, and Rin had initially thought she'd be going alone. But Sakura had already prepared an exchange student ID, so the sisters ended up heading to school together. Saber, not wanting to just sit around at home, insisted on coming too. So Sakura brought her along. Is it really okay for you not to go home? After their retreat the night before, Rin had gone straight to the Shiomi residence, and asked Archer to fetch her a change of clothes. They had talked things over briefly, and Rin had straightforwardly proposed forming an alliance. Sakura had agreed without hesitation. I'm the only one at home right now. Father and mother went back to our ancestral home in Zenju, Rin explained calmly. So in a way, I'm just as free as you are. I see, Sakura said. Do you have any intel, sis? Intel? On the masters participating in this Holy Grail War. How much do you know? Sakura asked. Rin looked slightly embarrassed. Honestly, with everything going on with my father, all I know is that the Mages Association and the 3 founding families are involved. I know some of the masters' names, but that's about it. In fact, until just last night, Rin hadn't even known Sakura was part of the Holy Grail War. But Sakura didn't tease her like she used to. She just nodded in quiet understanding. It's no surprise. After what happened in the last Holy Grail War, everyone's being extra cautious with information, Sakura said. But now that we're allies, it's only fair we share what we know. Chapter 155. Ever since reuniting with her younger sister, Sakura had been surprising Rin one step after another. While Rin only knew that 2 masters from the Mages Association were participating and could name them, Sakura had detailed knowledge of their individual capabilities. Bayzet, a sealing designation executor, was skilled in magecraft and exceptionally adept at close combat. Rumored to be capable of going toe-to-toe with a servant in a physical fight. Mer Isberry, the lord of the Department of Astromancy, was even more enigmatic. Actually, I have a decent grasp of the Department of Astromancy too, but Animosphere's magecraft is a bit different, Sakura went on. Back on the Mystic Eyes collection train, I once saw Miss Olgamari demonstrate a portion of that magecraft. She had drawn mana from both the heavens and the earth, using herself as the focal point, and summoned dozens of mana-based light spears to attack. That kind of grand magecraft normally required a full ritual site and several days to execute within the Department of Astromancy. The only reason it had manifested instantly was due to the presence of the tuner, Melvine, who helped stabilize it on the train. Even if its power didn't match the full version, It was still nothing to take lightly. Using magic through the sky. Sounds like a hassle, Saber remarked from behind. So, we should probably prioritize indoor battles or at least find covered terrain. That's a fair point, Sakura said seriously, but I doubt that's the only kind of magecraft the Department of Astromancy has. And since Mr. Marisberry is the head of the Animosphere family, he likely has access to even more unique techniques. As they continued to exchange information, the school gates came into view. Uncertain whether other masters might be present at school, Sakura had Saber move into an isolated area and spirit form herself, so she could follow discreetly and potentially catch an enemy master off guard if necessary. Masters at school. Rin muttered, counting on her fingers. Besides Sakura, there were the two from the Mages Association. Then there was Insburn herself. And finally, the Mata family's master. Leaving only one master of unknown origin. You think I misjudged something? Sakura asked. There is a Mata student at school, Rin said, frowning. But I recall he didn't have the qualifications to be a magus. Sakura nodded in realization. I remember now. He's Uncle Karaya's nephew, right? Yeah, that's him. Shinji Matu. I heard his father. Uncle Karaya's older brother. Died of illness 3 years ago. Rin rubbed her chin in thought. The Mata family's magic circuits should have ended with Uncle Karaya. At that, she looked up at Sakura. It's been ages since I've seen Uncle Karaya. Have you spoken to him recently? I had tea with him back in London before I left. Around New Year's, Sakura nodded. Right up until I departed, he was still working in London as a foreign correspondent. Then Shinji being the master is even less likely. Rin immediately dismissed the idea. In fact, she found it more plausible that Karaya himself had been dragged back to the Matu family to serve as their master. Let's leave it there for now, Sakura said. In truth, Karaya had only recently stayed in London. After deciding to return to Fuiuki for the Holy Grail War, Sakura had naturally considered her uncle, who had looked out for her for years. Keeping someone with magecraft aptitude away from the war was ideal. Even if, technically, Karaya had been formally expelled from the Matu family after the last war 10 years ago. But as she stepped through the school gate with her sister, Sakura suddenly felt something subtly off. She came to a halt, her gaze shifting as she looked around with a puzzled expression. What's wrong, Sakura? Rin stopped. Can't you feel it? Sakura asked. Feel what? Something like a barrier. Sakura looked around. Although the sensation was fleeting, she could still sense a slight distortion in the flow of mana in the air. It wasn't exactly chaotic, but it definitely seemed to be converging toward a specific point. You're right. The mana flow is off. It feels like a tangled mess of threads. No clear beginning or end. Saber, still in spirit form, shared her observation from the side. You can feel that? Rin activated her own mana, but she still didn't sense anything unusual. It's probably a surveillance-type barrier, Sakura guessed. If it wasn't set up by you, then that means there's another master somewhere in the school. That made Rin uneasy. How could that be? For someone to set up a barrier without getting noticed. It's still unclear if it's a full barrier, but there's definitely something similar affecting the school, Sakura continued. Truthfully, she was leaning more toward it being a barrier. If she hadn't been trained by someone who was practically unmatched in this area of magecraft, she might never have noticed it at all. Got it. I'll keep an eye out. Rin nodded to her. With that, the two resumed walking into the school. Up on the rooftop, someone was watching the school grounds through the chain-link fence. Tasaka and Shiomi, huh? So they're the ones Uncle's been looking after all these years? Looks like they noticed her field, Ryder. The speaker was Shinji Matu, Karaya's nephew. It was only meant to be a protective measure for you, Master. Behind him stood a handsome young man with dark red hair, dressed in a smart, school-style outfit. Ryder. If it can't be used offensively, it's useless, Shinji said with irritation. It can be used that way. Just wait until they're separated from their servants. Then we trap them inside, Ryder replied calmly. No need to rush. The other masters haven't shown themselves yet. Let's see if we can win them over. If they won't cooperate, then we get rid of them. Shinji smirked. But aren't they people your uncle knows? Exactly why we should show some courtesy. If we can avoid a fight, that's ideal. Shinji's grin turned cold. I'm the one who inherited the Manta family's magecraft. Even if they're uncles, people expelled from the family don't get to question what I do. As he spoke, insects crawling over the fence and concrete began to take flight one after another, vanishing from sight. Let the bugs do the watching for now. We'll figure out a next step later. Shinji turned away with a sneer, brushing past Ryder. But if you keep using magecraft like this, Master, your body won't. Shut up. I'm the master here. You're just a servant, so do as you're told. Snapping, Shinji cut Ryder off and stormed away from the rooftop. Ryder could only sigh quietly, powerless to stop this master. One already spiraling into self-destruction through his obsession with magecraft. Chapter 156. The new house Shiomi had mentioned was roughly the same size as his previous one. The only real drawback was the lack of a backyard. On the other hand, the front yard was spacious enough that even if a servant invaded and a battle broke out, there'd be ample room to fight without feeling cramped. He'd already hired a property management company to take care of things, so after completing the formalities with Morgan, they could move in and collect the keys immediately. Excellent choice, my husband. Morgan returned to the living room after setting up a barrier in the yard and addressed Shiomi with a pleased tone. The entire layout of the house felt like it had been tailor-made for her magecraft. Without any prior scouting, she had been able to select and deploy the most effective barrier spell purely on instinct. You could say that. I picked this place with Sakura in mind too. If she were to move in, she'd need a defensive barrier just the same, Shiomi said, setting a tea tray beneath the house's eaves. It ran in the family. If it suited Sakura, then it would suit Morgan even more. That said, I've basically turned this place into a fortress now, Morgan said. If any fools come knocking, I might just get to enjoy some good old-fashioned trench warfare. It's been ages. I'd like to see if I'm still sharp. Geez. You really are bloodthirsty, Shiomi said with a faint chuckle. Morgan picked up her teacup and glanced at him. Shiomi had set up a whiteboard in the living room and was busy sketching on it. A closer look revealed notes and diagrams detailing various masters and servants. On the nearby television, the news was playing in the background. In our next report, early this morning, a call came in from Mama Town. A resident was found dead in their home. According to sources, the victim had been alone, and police suspect this murder is linked to the earlier homicide in Shinto. What are you working on? Morgan asked, eyeing the whiteboard. Compiling intel on the Holy Grail War? You heard the news, didn't you? Shiomi said. It's just like 10 years ago. As soon as the Holy Grail War starts, the serial killings begin. If this had been his first time, maybe he wouldn't have made the connection. But it wasn't. Shiomi couldn't help drawing on past experience, linking these incidents to the Grail War. But do you think this will be a repeat of last time, my husband? Another clueless master with no idea what the Holy Grail even is? Morgan asked. I can't rule that out. Shiomi turned away from the whiteboard, arms crossed. Each servant's base stats vary. It's entirely possible a master is trying to boost their servant's strength by harvesting souls. To Magi, ordinary lives held little value. As long as they kept their actions veiled in secrecy, even the Mages Association rarely stepped in. So you're using process of elimination to figure out which faction might be behind this? Morgan asked. Shiomi nodded. Exactly. So far, the only viable suspects are the unidentified 7th Master and the Matu family's representative. Let's set that unknown master aside for now. The Matu family hasn't been able to produce a proper magus in years. You really think they have someone capable of fighting? What if Matu himself entered the fray? Shiomi replied, folding his arms. After the last Holy Grail War, I paid him a visit. But the old man had hidden himself too well. What I found was just a puppet body made of insects. Morgan grimaced. That's more than enough reason to want him eliminated immediately. And after that, I dug deeper into the Matu magecraft system, Shiomi continued. Originally, they specialized in water element magecraft. The insect manipulation was a later development. According to what's in the Clock Tower archives, this technique can forcibly alter someone without training or magical aptitude into a usable magus. But the effectiveness was severely limited. No matter how much time you invested, anyone created this way was ultimately nothing more than cannon fodder for the Holy Grail War. Sounds like it fits the profile. Killing civilians, absorbing souls for power, Morgan said, agreeing with Shiomi's analysis. It makes sense. Lacking strength and turning to dark methods for compensation. That's very much in line with how some magus operate, Shiomi replied, turning to the whiteboard covered in names of masters and servants. But we don't have enough proof yet. We'll need to look into it. If he could help it, he didn't want Sakura to deal with a magus like that. Even if she won. As he was sure she would. It would still leave a bad taste in her mouth. Just then, Shiomi's phone rang from the table. In the new century, phones had evolved rapidly, becoming smaller and more efficient. Everyone in the Shiomi household had one. Even Morgan used hers with ease. Unlike most Magi, who scoffed at modern tech, Shiomi had always embraced it. If science ever surpassed the magecraft of the Age of Gods, he'd gladly abandon magecraft for advanced technology. Hello. I see. Got it. After a brief conversation, he closed the phone. You look like something's come up. Trouble with the Drumroll? Morgan asked. No, Nothing like that, Shiomi said, sitting down. That was Karen. She passed along a message from the clock tower. One of the Mages Association personnel sent to monitor the Holy Grail War has gone missing. In addition to dispatching 2 Magus, the association had also assigned personnel to supervise the situation. Think they were one of the serial murder victims? Hard to say. They're just listed as missing. Shiomi glanced toward the TV, which had moved on to other news. And the person who vanished was the one overseeing Bazit Frogum Kremitz. Regardless of the motive, eliminating a supervisor before the war sees any real casualties makes it easier to shift suspicion onto other masters and servants. Maybe it was to prevent the association from uncovering secrets. Bazit came from an Irish Magus family. The Kremitz line had always kept its distance from the clock tower. In fact, Bazit herself was considered an outlier. So the clock tower. Or rather, that old hag wants something from you again? Unluckily, no. This time it's a request from Lord Trumbellio, relayed through Karen, Shiomi said. He wants me, now that I've returned to Fuiuki, to look into the circumstances behind the disappearance of the supervisory personnel. The request was just to gather intel, but looking into Bazit's situation aligned neatly with what Shiomi had planned anyway. Chapter 157, After school, Sakura crouched in a corner of the rooftop, inspecting the barrier's anchor point. Her sister had been called away by a teacher, so while waiting, she wandered the school and discovered something resembling a barrier's base on the roof. Knew it. She muttered thoughtfully. Behind her, Saber materialized, crouching beside her to take a look. What's this? A barrier's core point, Master. More accurately, it's something like the eye of a formation, Sakura said, placing her hand on it in an attempt to dispel it. But the node was sealed with a complex spell that couldn't be unraveled quickly. So this is Caster's doing? Saber asked with a smirk. Probably not, Sakura replied, withdrawing her hand and studying the spell node. This setup feels more like something rigged together using pre-existing materials. What's it for? Draining the life force of people inside the barrier? Saber frowned, clearly displeased. Sakura closed her eyes, analyzing the spell again. No. It's more like a barrier that alters spatial rules. What do you mean? Saber asked. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe when it's fully deployed, it'll shift everyone inside to another dimension, Sakura replied. She could sense a trace of something akin to imaginary number space, but it wasn't quite the same. To anyone outside, it might just seem like the people inside vanished, Sakura added. In any case, even I can't nullify it right away. It's likely the result of a noble phantasm. Saber let out a sigh. Always with the sneaky little tricks. Whether it's Caster or someone else, it's irritating. For now, we should focus on gathering intel on the other masters and servants. Sakura stood, gazing at the undisturbed anchor point. She suspected there were more throughout the school. But without knowing the barrier's structure or the purpose of the noble phantasm behind it, she could only overlay an interference spell. This way, even if the barrier activated, the disruption might cause a flaw. Something they could exploit from the inside. Suddenly, Saber turned, eyes sharp with caution. Relax, it's me. Archer's red-coated form solidified into view. Oh, it's you. Next time, drop the spirit form before showing up, Saber said, relaxing but clearly annoyed. I'll keep that in mind, Archer replied with a smile. Rin asked me to tell you she's done and waiting at the main building entrance, Sakura Shiomi. Just Sakura is fine, she answered casually. Saber, let's head over. We can check for anything strange along the way. Got it. Saber flexed her shoulders, then vanished from the rooftop. Sakura turned to leave, but Archer spoke behind her. What were you doing up here? Investigating that barrier I mentioned. Didn't my sister fill you in? Sakura asked. She did, Archer said, arms crossed. I noticed your movements today. For a Magus, you're surprisingly seasoned. You flatter me, Sakura replied with a polite nod. Archer shook his head. That wasn't a compliment. Just an observation. As a Magus, you're more mature than Rin. We were raised in different environments. I've been studying at the Magus headquarters for years now. No, I mean the scent of blood on you, Archer said. Unlike Rin, you've seen real combat. Am I wrong? You could say that. Sakura paused, then smiled and shook her head. Though I've yet to actually kill someone in a fight. Back in London, she had indeed been drawn into conflicts among Magi. Real battles where lives were on the line. So she understood all too well what combat between Magi entailed. Like last night. While Rin still held back a little, Sakura had already been prepared to strip her sister of her fighting ability and team up with Saber to kill Archer if needed. Rin had the resolve, but not the ruthlessness where it counted. And with the Innsburn family's interference, things ended up as they were now. It doesn't really matter whether you've killed someone or not. For a magus, that moment will come eventually, Archer said. Sakura raised an eyebrow, surprised. So, Archer, you've already sensed that my sister and I might end up fighting, and since you think winning the Holy Grail is out of reach, you came here to gather intel? Not at all. Just curious, that's all. Archer shrugged, hands open in a casual gesture. But watching how you carry yourself, it's honestly hard to believe you and Rin are sisters. Not that strange. We were separated from a young age and received completely different magecraft training, Sakura replied smoothly. It might not sound great to talk down my birth family, but compared to what the Tosaka family has passed down through the generations, what I've gained far surpasses what my sister inherited. There was clear pride in her voice, and Archer was momentarily taken aback. My apologies. The Red Archer gave a polite nod before fading into spirit form and vanishing from the rooftop. Sakura didn't quite understand why he apologized, but she didn't let go of her earlier suspicion. Archer was already thinking ahead. If their alliance managed to wipe out the other factions, then the alliance would inevitably break down for the final showdown. And when that happened, her sister, clearly the weaker master, would need every bit of information she could get. Still, Sakura figured her sister probably hadn't considered things that far. With that thought, Sakura decided there was no need to bring it up. Holy Grail War or not, she understood her sister's character well. And that was reason enough to place her full trust in her. From the rooftop down to the school building's entrance, she spotted her sister waiting there. Sorry to keep you waiting, Sakura, Rin said, giving a gentle wave. Not at all. I'm the one who made you wait, Sakura said as she changed her shoes and caught up. I should have waited in the classroom or just stayed here. It's fine. Waiting a little isn't a big deal, Rin smiled. The teacher didn't call me in for anything serious. Just the usual reminder not to stay out too late. Said it's unsafe for a model student like me to be wandering around. It's about that case, right? Sakura caught on immediately. The serial murders in Fuiuki City had already stirred up talk at school. As masters, it was hard not to connect it to the Holy Grail War. Yeah. I've got a few ideas. Let's talk it over when we get back. Chapter 158. Compared to Sakura and Rin, whose movements were slightly delayed by their roles as students, the other masters had already taken action. As night began to swallow the twilight sky, Bazet, carrying a cylindrical case holding her family's heirloom mystic code, crossed the Fuiuki Bridge, planning to cut through the park on her way to the streets of Mama Town. She had spent the day cautiously scouting around Shindo but hadn't uncovered much. So, she decided to use the cover of night to investigate Mama Town instead. Based on intel she'd gathered beforehand, all three founding families of the Holy Grail War, including the Innsburn family, who held property in Fuiuki, had settled west of the Mayan River in Mama Town. That area sat closer to strong ley lines, increasing the chances of encountering other servants and masters. Staying concealed and moving with care, Bazet followed the disciplined habits she developed during her time as a sealing designation enforcer. But she quickly noticed something was off. The park was unnaturally quiet. Even in winter, it shouldn't have been this deserted. Not a single person in sight. Bazet came to a halt. There was no mistaking it, a repelling barrier had been placed to drive off bystanders. This was a battlefield someone had carefully chosen. It wasn't that she had let her guard down. The opposing side had simply been more thorough. Bazet hadn't noticed the barrier at all. It looked like a master had already come for her, ready to initiate combat. Lancer, who had been following in spirit form, suddenly manifested and stepped in front of her. Normally, Lancer wouldn't do something like this. He already knew Bazet's strength. Which made her pause. Stay sharp, master. This one's not ordinary, Lancer said in a low voice. A chill wind, laced with bloodlust, swept past as Bazet instinctively looked up. There, perched atop a park lamppost, was a figure. Shiomi. Sir? Bazet recognized Shiomi instantly. She had reviewed his dossier before. Oh? So this is the acquaintance master mentioned yesterday? Lancer grinned, his killing intent unmasked. You one of the 7 masters? No, just the opposite. Shiomi had his hands tucked casually in his coat pockets as he leaned forward slightly, peering down at them. I just happened to notice Miss Bazet's movements, so I thought I'd stop by to say hello. Had it been any other master, Bazet might have already launched an attack. But this wasn't a master. And that made her hesitate? Especially since the power radiating from him was unmistakably far above her own. Aren't you supposed to be in London? What are you doing in Fuiuki? Bazet asked. That's an odd thing to say. I used to live in Fuiuki. What's strange about coming home for a bit? Shiomi answered with an easygoing tone. It was such a simple and straightforward answer, Bazet couldn't refute it. I'm just here to ask one thing. Was it you who took out the association's supervisor? Shiomi asked again. Bayzit frowned. She hadn't expected that the association would send someone like him as a replacement after the supervisor went missing. From the sound of it, you're the substitute for those rookies? Lancer spoke up, his crimson eyes locked onto Shiomi. What a bloodthirsty way to greet someone. He found the man in front of him very strange. Clearly a human magus, yet carrying the scent of that place. We're all in the same business. A little bloodlust comes with a job, doesn't it? Shiomi shrugged, showing no sign of backing off. Lancer narrowed his eyes. I see. Then I'll have to ask you and your colleagues to go join them. As he spoke, a crimson spear slowly materialized in his hand. This time, even Bayzit felt the sudden shift in the air. Oh? Shiomi's expression changed too. Gone was the relaxed, professional demeanor. His face grew serious. I didn't expect your servant to be the child of light. Ku Chilane. To speak a servant's true name outright. Bayzit was visibly shocked. But Lancer didn't react. He simply leveled his spear at Shiomi. You saw my spear and guessed my name immediately, Lancer said coldly. You know this weapon? Shiomi drew his hand from his pocket and slowly opened it. Know it? That's putting it lightly. A spear similar to, but not the same as. Lancer's appeared in his hand. It was unmistakably a noble phantasm. Bayzit was stunned. Was Shiomi also from a lineage like her own? Perhaps one of the carriers? Lancer's pupils narrowed sharply. How do you have that spear? Isn't it obvious? For the same reason as you, Shiomi replied, looking down at Ku Chilane. Traditionally speaking, even if we're separated by ears. I should probably call you senpai, right? The moment those words left his mouth, Lancer shifted into a fighting stance. The smile on his face twisted into one brimming with killing intent. Well, isn't that something? Are you a fraud stealing a legacy, or the real thing? A fellow disciple? The smile vanished as veins bulged on his forehead. Let's find out if you're worthy of holding that spear. As soon as the words were spoken, both Lancer and Shiomi vanished. Only to reappear midair, their red spears clashing in a violent spark of steel and pressure that rippled through the park. Not bad. You can keep up with my speed, Lancer said with growing excitement. Back up, Master. I can't guarantee your safety once this gets serious. Understood. Bayzit quickly pulled back. Under normal circumstances, even without being a master, an attack like this would have called for her response. But she understood perfectly. Right now, to Lancer, Denkai Shiomi was an opponent meant only for a servant of the spear. No matter what, Bayzit couldn't interfere. She could only observe until the battle reached its conclusion. Until then, anyone who intervened would be treated as an enemy by both fighters. That's what I should be saying. Is that really all the speed you've got? In the blink of an eye, Shiomi appeared at Lancer's side, sweeping his spear out in a gleaming arc. A flash of light that traced a fleeting crescent. The strike would have skewered anyone who hesitated. But Ku Chilane twisted aside just in time, countering with a side strike of his own. A massive surge of mana burst across the park's walkway. Within mere seconds, the two spears clashed hundreds of times. Each strike sought an opening. Each time, the attacker was read and deflected before they could land a blow. They moved like precision marksmen. No wasted movement, no pointless strikes. Every action aimed for the heart. Bang! With a thunderous shockwave, the two finally broke apart from their last exchange, leaping back into ready stances. Lancer grinned wider, his face now painted with bloodlust. Shiomi stood silent and cold, his gaze like ice, locked on his opponent. Chapter 159, Bayzit finally understood. Tenkai Shiomi wasn't just the strongest current ceiling designation executor. The Magus evaluation system couldn't even begin to measure his strength. His fight with Lancer had already surpassed the limits of what a human could ever hope to reach. If she had to face Lancer herself without using a noble phantasm, Bayzit wasn't sure how long she could withstand the onslaught in his current state. Every step the two took shattered the ground beneath them. Each clash of their weapons sent shockwaves tearing through trees, snapping streetlights like twigs. The park's paths and lawns were scarred with destruction. The street lamp where Shiomi had first appeared was now a crumpled wreck, flung meters away, leaving a crater in the ground. Their speed had gone beyond what Bayzit's eyes could follow. Even with her vision reinforced by mana, all she could see were afterimages in two blurring colors, streaking past each other. Only when they paused could she catch fleeting glimpses of their forms. The wind howled low, and the air itself seemed to scream in protest against the laws of physics being so violently broken. The abandoned park was being devastated in a way it had never known. This wasn't a sanctioned Holy Grail war battle. But it was every bit as intense as one. It was as if the long-buried battles of the Age of Heroes had returned to life here and now. Crimson lightning ripped across the sky. Roaring shockwaves split the earth. I take back what I said, Lancer grinned. Those moves, that spear technique, that footwork. They're just like mine. You were taught by the same person. Shiomi slowly shifted his stance, circling to find another opening. No wonder our master always compared me to you. Your skills do the name justice. Humphrey. Lancer gave a derisive snort. Still didn't expect you to be using the exact same spear as her. Even I'm a little surprised. When he first saw the weapon in Shiomi's hand, Lancer had wondered if the man's ancestors had snuck into the land of shadows and stolen the prototype spear from there. I told you. It's for the same reason as you. Shiomi launched another thrust. That same origin. That same master. Even separated by 1,000 years, when they met again on the battlefield of the Holy Grail War, the living and the heroic spirit could still clash on equal ground. No matter how they adjusted their tactics, their spear work stemmed from the same discipline. Every subtle movement was enough to read the other's next step. To be honest, Lancer said, his fighting spirit surging with the heat of battle, we servants don't exactly have much free will. I thought this would just be another routine duel. But to cross spears with someone like you? That's rare. Right back at you, Lancer. Shiomi flicked his spear upward, deflecting Lancer's downward strike, then swept the butt of his weapon at Lancer's ribs. Predictably, Lancer dodged with ease. I'm already enough as Master's most prized disciple. So just go sit back down where you belong. Hearing that, Lancer spun his spear lightly and rested it across his shoulder, holding it one-handed. Honestly, even if it's from our master, I've never cared much for the title top disciple, Lancer said with a sly grin, sensing a way to push Shiomi even further. But if some third-rate pretender wants to call himself the one and only, yeah, that's not gonna fly. Kuchilane had realized it already. Shiomi wanted to defeat him using the exact same techniques. And it was precisely because of that Lancer wouldn't go down easily. Besides, Shiomi was definitely still holding something back. If it came down to both of them unleashing the true name of their red spears, aiming to pierce each other's hearts and die together, Lancer would only find that ending disappointing. Then, I'll give you what you want, Shiomi said coolly, lifting his spear one-handed. He reached his left hand into the empty air beside him. And slowly gripped something unseen. Lancer's expression shifted again. A look of stunned disbelief crept across his face. What's the matter, Lancer? Don't tell me. You don't have a second spear? Shiomi smirked, the corners of his lips curling into a taunting grin. No matter how many spears you've got, there's only one thing I need to do. Kuchilane roared, unable to contain his excitement. The rush of blood and surging mana within him burned like wildfire. Twin spears. Back in the land of shadows, Kuchilane hadn't had the luxury of time. Mastering a single spear had been enough to make him nearly invincible on the battlefield. In the end, it was his own flaws that brought about his death. Not lack of skill. He never imagined someone else would have both the time and the talent to fully master their master's ultimate technique. A small part of him couldn't help but envy that. But more than envy, what truly mattered was getting to fight. The battle resumed, and Lancer's attacks came fiercer, deadlier than ever. Yet, just as he had hoped, Denkai Shiomi wasn't thrown off by dual-wielding spears. Those spears were meant to be wielded with both hands. Shiomi moved as if they were extensions of his body. Fast, fluid, and precise. He unleashed the full potential of the soaring spear of piercing death's superior reach and weight. Attack left. The right followed. Strike right. The left answered in kind. No openings. No imbalance. No weak side. Both spears struck with the same devastating force. It was like facing their master himself. There was no hope of targeting the weaker side. Because neither spear was. If Lancer wanted to win, he'd have to overpower both at once. Before long, Lancer began to feel the burden of being a servant compared to a living warrior. Tied to the limitations of his class, even with access to runes, he often avoided using them. Too troublesome. And as a result, he wasn't as sharp with them as he once was. So when he saw the twin spears arc outward in mirrored swings, summoning a whirling inferno, even he had to back off from the firestorm. He knew full well. Magic resistance or not, taking a rune-enhanced blow like that wouldn't be pretty. You bastard. Using runes mid-fight. That's cheating. Lancer barked. Shiomi slammed the tip of his right-hand spear into the ground. What a ridiculous complaint. You're our master's disciple too, aren't you? Runecraft is as basic as it gets. The cracked ground surged to life, blades of magical energy erupting all around Lancer, closing in from every side. Only thanks to his elite agility did Kuchilane manage to find a narrow path through the trap, dodging by the skin of his teeth. Damn. I've got no comeback when it's a fellow student saying that, Lancer muttered with a helpless smile. Of course, he wasn't really complaining. After all, they had the same master. Chapter 160, You really are quite the warmonger, my dear. From the other side of the park, perched atop a tree, Morgan watched the battle from a distance and murmured to herself. Originally, Xiaomi had only intended to check in on Bayzit, one of the masters. After tracking her movements, he planned to carry out a simple inquiry, per the association's request issued by Lord Trumbellio, wrap things up neatly, and leave. That was why Morgan hadn't followed him. Xiaomi was more than capable of handling himself. But she hadn't expected Bayzit's servant to be Lancer, Ku Chilane, the Child of Light. And that, in turn, made Xiaomi, who hadn't planned to escalate things, shift his focus entirely toward his fellow disciple. The battle, which began as a simple melee, had now become a full-blown clash of magecraft. The primordial runes weren't Xiaomi's exclusive domain. As a student of Skaithak as well, Ku Chilane had also mastered the 18 primordial runes. So when Xiaomi began channeling magecraft through the twin magical spears in his hands, Ku Chilane, despite the limitations of his Lancer class, found himself forced to respond with magecraft of his own, a rare occurrence. A storm of fire and wind spiraled violently through the park, reducing everything caught in its path to ash in an instant. Cracked cement paths had blackened, the air thick with dust, like the aftermath of a raging inferno. This is getting troublesome, Ku Chilane muttered, stroking his chin, watching his barely sustained grand magecraft gradually losing ground to his juniors. It was clear. Xiaomi's magic was starting to overwhelm his own. As a Lancer, his mana reserves were unimpressive, barely at a C rank. And while he was skilled in fire-based magic, it was only through that affinity that he could maintain some semblance of his original power in this class. Xiaomi, however, was on a different level entirely. Wind, earth, water, fire. He wielded them all with no sign of being bound by elemental limitations. His grand magecraft arsenal seemed endless. Slowly but surely, Xiaomi was breaking down Lancer's magical rhythm. You're not one of the 5 elemental types, are you? Lancer asked, leveling his spear and shifting into a ready stance. He was waiting for a window to rush in and force a return to close-quarters combat. Who knows? I've never really thought about it. By the time I noticed, this was just how I was. Xiaomi traced a symbol in the air with his index finger. White runes flickered and vanished in a flash. Even before the words left his mouth, Ku Chilane felt the atmosphere around him shift. Within a 10-meter radius, the air became saturated with countless glowing runes. Their exchanges hadn't left room for that kind of setup. There was no way Xiaomi should have been able to carve that many runes into the space around them. But with his deep knowledge of the craft, Lancer quickly identified the anchor points. 3 specific runes. Arranged in sequence, they meant one thing: creation. TCH. He's using runes to make more runes? Lancer's blood surged again as he roared and charged at Xiaomi. Xiaomi hadn't carved out all those runes directly. But planting the initial 3 during a lull in combat? That was easy enough. The so-called magecraft duel had just been misdirection. Even Lancer had been fooled. As he dashed forward, he couldn't help but scoff inwardly. Magus were such irritating opponents, always scheming and never fighting straight. Though that thought, unintentionally, included himself. This time, Lancer's strike met no immediate resistance. He had already prepared a counter if Xiaomi parried his thrust, but instead, the guy bulk felt like it had slammed into the trunk of a great tree. Suddenly bogged down with massive resistance. From the crimson tip of the spear, a chill spread outward. Ice, blooming rapidly in every direction. Diamond dust. Xiaomi's voice echoed through the scattering shards of ice. A spell of this level wouldn't have much effect on Ku Chilane directly. His C-rank magic resistance would dampen most of its power. But as a way to halt his next move, it was brutally effective. When both fighters wield spears with lightning speed, even the slightest hesitation could mean death. Shit. Lancer cursed, eyes wide. Before he could finish, the runes encircling him began detonating in rapid succession, engulfing the spear-wielding servant in a chain of explosions. From her position behind the battle, Bayzit raised an arm to shield herself from the shock wave that swept outward in all directions. The blast raged for over 10 seconds before finally subsiding, leaving the center of the park cloaked in smoke, debris scattered everywhere. As the dust began to clear, Lancer was nowhere to be seen. Only his crimson spear lay abandoned on the scorched, cracked pavement. Did he lose? Bayzit wondered. But the mana link between them hadn't been severed. Xiaomi looked up and saw Lancer plummeting toward him. The fallen spear twitched, then shot upward with a sharp whistle, carving through the air in a jagged path before landing cleanly in his outstretched hand. Using the momentum from his fall, Lancer hurled his spear at Xiaomi with all his might. It crashed into the one Xiaomi threw a beat later, both weapons deflecting off one another with a shriek of metal. Lancer landed heavily and caught his returning Diebold. He looked ragged, wounded, scorched, coated in dust and grime from failing to dodge the full brunt of the earlier explosion. Bayezid immediately activated a basic healing spell, and his injuries began to knit back together. Damn impressive. I don't even know if I should call you a magus or a spearman, Lancer said with a carefree grin, unshaken. It's not that easy to kill me, you know. We've got plenty of time, and my master hasn't ordered a retreat. He raised his spear and pointed it directly at Shiomi's forehead. So, how about a second round? If you can take me down here, you can have the title of Master's top disciple. Injuries and setbacks only seem to fuel Lancer's fighting spirit. Humphrey. Shiomi spun his twin spears in a pair of crisp flourishes and resumed his stance, silently accepting Ku Chilane's challenge. All around them, the park fell into a tense hush. Only the wind stirred the leaves of trees left standing, the soft rustle barely audible. Like gunslingers in an old western, the two adjusted their breathing, heartbeats syncing with the moment. Then, a light footstep sliced through the stillness. No bloodlust. No magical pressure. Just the sound of someone approaching. Sensing the new arrival, Shiomi and Lancer turned sharply toward the same direction. That is, Morgan, who had been watching from afar with amused detachment, was now visibly startled. And along with that surprise came a creeping chill. One that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. Chapter 161, a figure in a brown cloak slowly emerged from the far end of the road. The oversized hood concealed the face, revealing only white hair and dark brown skin through the gaps. Just enough to keep Shiomi from identifying the stranger. But one thing was clear. That was a servant. Even without the Holy Grail's sanction, even if he wasn't part of the current war, Shiomi could still tell. The aura was unmistakable. Identify yourself. Lancer pivoted his spear to point directly at the figure. If you're a servant, then name your class. Their battle had reached its peak, only to be cut off by this sudden interruption. And Lancer wasn't pleased in the slightest. At his challenge, the cloaked figure halted. Servant. Caster. Bayezid clutched at her chest. Something felt deeply wrong. There was no killing intent, no hostility. Yet she felt as if a hand had clamped around her throat. Like she could die at any moment. Even after facing countless life or death battles as a sealing designation executor, no one had ever made her feel like this. Caster? Lancer echoed in surprise, catching her muttered words. He stayed fully alert, no longer concerned about a sneak attack from his junior behind him. Because Shiomi, like him, had his full attention locked on Caster. The figure raised his head ever so slightly, still cloaked. And yet, even without seeing his face, Shiomi could feel it. He was being watched. Is he looking at me? Shiomi thought, startled. But that detail didn't matter now. With Caster appearing, Shiomi wasn't about to rush in like Lancer might. He had no intention of making a move yet. At the very least, he needed to be far more prepared. This was Caster. If it was that man, could he even make it out of here alive? He glanced back to confirm Morgan's position. Even with a recontracted command spell or any other emergency measure, the 100 meters between them felt like an uncrossable abyss. Lancer, let's end it here for today, Shiomi said slowly, his eyes still on Caster. We'll finish this another time. Oh? I'm good to stop too, Lancer replied. Rather than sparring with you, we ought to be focusing on that magus servant instead. That's not what I meant. Shiomi snapped. Huh? Lancer's brows furrowed. He could sense something was off. For Master's sake, I'll cover you this time. Take your master and retreat. Now, Shiomi said, shifting back to his usual calm tone. He raised 3 fingers on the hand holding his spear. Not to signal, but to cast. Lightning. Wind. Fire. 3 grand magecraft spells launched in rapid succession, each one surging toward Caster. Lancer thought to himself, good move, kid, and bent low, ready to charge in. But then he saw something he couldn't believe. Those spells, formidable enough to trouble even someone with the rank magic resistance, disappeared. Not deflected. Not absorbed. They were simply erased. As if cast into a void. What the hell? Lancer's eyes widened. He understood now why Shiomi had reacted so strongly earlier. This wasn't just another servant. They didn't know his true name. They didn't know his parameters. And his power was on an entirely different level. Shiomi clicked his tongue, shoved Lancer aside, and rushed forward. But this time, he didn't use magic. Instead, he hurled one of his spears into the air. And it burst apart, fragmenting into dozens of identical spears that rained down like a storm. Not one of them made it through. Every spear was deflected before it could land a hit, scattering across the park. Before he could summon them back, An arcane sigil bloomed before Castor. Xiaomi didn't hesitate. He spun his remaining spear and shifted it into a shield. A cannon of pure mana fired. Without that instant defense, Xiaomi would have been swallowed whole by the blast. Shredded by pure, unfiltered magical energy. This power. Xiaomi gritted his teeth. The 10th primordial rune. Rune of exorcism. Whether it was a noble phantasm or just a pure magic cannon, Xiaomi didn't have the luxury of figuring it out. He threw everything he had into defense, and the unleashed mana exploded outward, obliterating what was left of the seaside park. Thankfully, a ward had already been cast to drive civilians away. If there had been any ordinary people caught in that blast, they would have died without question. With a raw, guttural roar, louder than anything he'd ever unleashed, Xiaomi drew on every ounce of his mana and braced through the attack. Even so, his shirt sleeves were torn to ribbons, revealing nothing but battered arms and bleeding cuts. As the barrage ended, he retracted his magic spear and began preparing a retreat spell. But someone had misread the situation. Bazit. Her body enhanced with layers of rune magecraft, she seized the opportunity and charged forward. Behind her floated a solid, metallic sphere. Her mystic code. Stop. Bazit. Lancer shouted. He knew what she was trying to do. Create an opening so they could all escape together. And while Bazit at full strength could match most servants, this one was a different story. Her rune-enchanted fist came within inches of Castor. Then slammed into an invisible wall. Before she could swing again, space itself twisted around her. She and the air surrounding her froze in place. Then compressed. A low, guttural scream escaped Bazit's throat. She couldn't move at all. No hesitation. Xiaomi and Lancer moved at once, like longtime war comrades, their magic spears slicing through the air in perfect synchronicity. Their strike finally forced Castor back several steps. Xiaomi had no intention of dragging this out. Grabbing both Lancer and Bazit, he launched the retreat. The three vanished into a watery blue mirror that shimmered into existence. And then they were gone, leaving nothing behind. The park, now battered beyond recognition, held no trace of Magus or servant. Castor stood in silence, lips slightly parted in surprise, then closed them with no visible emotion. Well? Your first real combat since entering the Holy Grail War. Was it disappointing? Behind him, a white-haired man in white robes stepped into view. Older than he looked, calm and composed. Castor opened his mouth, hesitated, then merely shook his head. I didn't feel anything, he answered. His master. Mer is very Animosphere, Lord of Astromancy at the Clock Tower. Nodded. I see. Mer is Barry's voice was warm, his expression unbothered by the response. Still, you did agree to my plan. And then suddenly changed your mind and came here. Did that man's words really bother you so much? A little, Castor admitted. Mer is Barry gave a small nod. Since they've retreated, we should go as well. With that, he turned. Castor followed silently. And soon, nothing remained of the ruined park. Chapter 162, the spell that transported Xiaomi and Lancer's master was Morgan's mirror. The three of them reappeared in an alley 7 or 8 blocks away from the seaside park near the Mayan River. You really saved us, Xiaomi said, leaning against a wall and thanking Morgan. Morgan gave a small wave of her hand. It was nothing. From the moment Castor appeared to when I activated the water mirror for the transfer, the timing was incredibly tight. If you two hadn't drawn his attention, the mirror would have been disrupted. That was already amazing, Xiaomi replied with a wry smile. She'd managed to transfer 3 people across nearly 100 meters in just a few heartbeats. Even Xiaomi, no stranger to magecraft, found himself impressed all over again by Morgan's genius. More importantly, Morgan reached out to touch Xiaomi's bloodied, sleeve-torn arm. Let's treat your injuries first. Xiaomi glanced down, lifting his arm. They're not a big deal. As he spoke, the wounds began to heal right before their eyes. There was no need for further treatment. Morgan smiled faintly, then turned her gaze to Lancer. The blue spearman was currently half kneeling on the ground, cradling Bazit in his arms, carefully checking her condition. Looks like Bazit took quite a hit. To rush in like that, should I call it courage, or just recklessness? Xiaomi muttered, scratching his head. Logically, someone with her years as a sealing designation executor should have known better on a battlefield. Xiaomi figured it was probably because Bazit had Lancer by her side, and she thought she could help since he was there too. Yeah, Lancer said as he stood, still holding Bazit. Anyway, that's it for today. We didn't get to settle things between us, but if you're looking for another round, I'm not turning it down. Xiaomi shrugged. Up to you. This was supposed to be business, but I didn't expect you to be this war as a Lancer. Guess I got carried away. That's what I like to hear. Lancer grinned. That's exactly how a disciple of the Land of Shadows should be. Maybe. Shiomi pressed his lips together, finding no real argument. After all, Skathak herself, always calm and precise, had a surprisingly battle-hungry nature. There wasn't much entertainment in the Land of Shadows, and once Shiomi had grown strong enough to spar evenly with her, he became her favorite pastime. With a master like that, the disciples were bound to turn out similar. So, Lancer sidled up beside Shiomi, throwing a half-playful, half-wary glance at Morgan. "Aren't you gonna introduce me? Who's the lady here? Your servant?" "No. My wife," Shiomi said, one hand on his hip as he introduced her openly. "She is still technically a servant, yes. But she's not participating in this Holy Grail war." Lancer blinked, stunned. "Seriously? Damn, I guess even as your senior, I've got to bow my head this time." Then he leaned close to Shiomi's ear and muttered, "But just a word of advice. Watch out with this kind of woman. She doesn't look easy to handle." "Cut the chatter, Kuchilane." Morgan had heard him, but her tone remained cool as she looked at him. "In this era, there's a saying, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want." Shiomi raised a brow. "I know you meant no harm. But I don't want to hear that again, Lancer." Yeah, I get it," Lancer replied, one eye closed in mock surrender. "I mean, I did die because I got tangled up with a malicious goddess, remember?" The implication was clear. Kuchilane had sensed something about Morgan that reminded him of Maurigan, and that was why he'd warned his junior. "What does that have to do with me?" Morgan replied with a wicked smile. "If it were me, I'd just curse the man who dumped me and cling to him until he died." "See? Told you so." Lancer sighed, almost too tired to joke. He gave Shiomi a pat on the back. "Good luck, man. I've got an injured master to look after, so I'll leave the chatting to you two." He turned with Basic in his arms, preparing to leap onto the rooftops. But just before taking off, something seemed to occur to him. He looked back at Shiomi with an unusually serious expression. "Looks like there's a real monster in this Holy Grail war. No matter how it ends, I'll come back for a proper rematch." "I'll hold you to that," Shiomi nodded. Lancer leapt up, and with a few agile bounds, vanished into the night skyline of Fuiuki. Shiomi pushed himself off the wall, rubbing his arms against the chill, ready to return home and recover. "Kuchilane says what he wants. I'm not bothered," he muttered. "Even if he curses you to death?" Morgan asked. "I mean, it's not like I'd." Shiomi flinched, cautiously glancing at her. Morgan met his eyes. "Just kidding. Even if you've got other women on your mind, so long as you don't forget who comes first, it's fine." Shiomi gave a sheepish grin. "No matter what, your first woman will always be your teacher." Morgan tilted his chin up with a fingertip. Though she was technically looking up at him, the smile on her lips held an unexpectedly intense pressure. "That's an unchangeable fact. And honestly, I'm too tired to keep making a fuss over it." "How do you even know about that?" Shiomi grimaced. He was sure he'd cut the master-servant memory link that allowed dream sharing. But Morgan's face turned solemn. "I even know the true name of the caster who appeared today. Just like you." "You already?" Shiomi was taken aback. "His true name is Solomon. The king of magecraft," she said. "Actually, I shouldn't even be saying that aloud. Just speaking it can invoke a curse." Despite her warning, Morgan showed no fear of the so-called curse. All traces of levity had vanished. Shiomi's expression mirrored her seriousness. "I only clashed with him to buy time for retreat." Shiomi looked up at the moon through the narrow gap between buildings. "But I didn't expect even my magecraft would fail against him. The title King of Magecraft is no exaggeration. There's no way I can let Sakura face someone like that. Not a matter of whether she should be protected. She would die for certain. The King of Magecraft wasn't an enemy mortal magi or standard servants could handle. To protect Sakura, I'll have to break the rules and interfere in this Holy Grail war." Shiomi took Morgan's hand, locking eyes with her. "If you're willing, lend me your strength." "If our enemy is the King of Magecraft," Morgan nodded gently, "even if you hadn't asked, I would have stepped in." Chapter 163, Shinji Matu was in serious trouble. As usual, after school he had taken a few girls out. Shopping, karaoke, and finally a love hotel. Being from a prestigious family in Mama Town with no shortage of wealth, Shinji had no problem attracting attention from the opposite sex. But on his way home, walking through the night, he was ambushed by a servant. Overconfident in his abilities, Shinji had completely overlooked the fact that the Holy Grail War had already begun, with several masters and servants yet to show themselves. He'd even left the house without bringing his own servant along. It was a basic rule that battles in the Holy Grail War took place at night. When he left school, it was still daylight. But now, it was fully dark. "You're assassin." Clutching his bleeding shoulder, Shinji glared hatefully at the servant who had attacked him with throwing knives. A black figure wrapped in a loose cloak, a white mask covering its face. There was no doubt. Assassin. The true name was Hassan Isaba. But it was unclear which iteration of the legendary name this was. Until he revealed himself and attacked, not even the magical familiars. Shinji's surveillance insects had detected his presence. Assassin stepped forward slowly, dagger in hand, ready to finish the job. Don't you dare! With a furious roar, veins bulged on Shinji's face. Marks of the crest worms writhing beneath his skin. He had no natural magical aptitude. His transformation into a magus was a forced one, done by his grandfather, Tsukunmatu, as a last resort. After 10 years of grueling training, he could finally manage as a magus. The cost? Every time he used magic, his lifespan shortened. But Shinji, obsessed with the Matu family's legacy of magecraft, couldn't care less. Dozens of bladed insects surged from the surrounding greenery, swarming toward Assassin. What? Assassin, having mistaken him for an ordinary human, was caught off guard. Facing a magus changed everything. If left unchecked, those bugs could seriously injure even a servant. He backflipped to avoid the swarm and slashed with his dagger, cleaving through the approaching insects. But then, a fireball burst through the air, splitting mid-flight into several smaller orbs that exploded within the insect swarm, setting off a chain of blasts. So you're a magus after all. I thought you were just some pathetic nobody. A mocking voice rang out. If that's the case, your heart and soul might actually be useful to my servant. Shinji staggered to his feet, glaring at the man emerging from the shadows. He wore a black suit with a red collar, had an unshaven face, glasses, and a smug grin. The look in his eyes was uncomfortable. Like a wolf sizing up its prey. You're Assassin's master? Shinji asked, holding his arm, the bleeding slowing. Oh? You figured that out? Then you must be a master too. The man smiled lazily. Name's Barrel Gut. I'll be the one killing you. If you don't want to die, better use your command spell and summon your servant. Despite the seemingly casual words, his tone was unmistakably that of a predator savoring the hunt. With Barrel's signal, Assassin flung 3 black throwing knives, their slender forms nearly invisible in the darkness. But just before they struck Shinji's head, something unseen deflected them away. Ryder emerged from the shadows. Like an assassin, she wore a black cloak, her face hidden behind a mask painted with a black serpentine pattern. Master, I apologize for being late, said Ryder. You trying to get me killed or what? Shinji snapped, showing no gratitude at all as he scolded her. Ryder held a long, slender weapon with a curved blade. More like a sickle than a spear. Hey, so that's your servant? And she's masked too? Barrel stroked his chin. Now that's got me curious. What kind of background could she have? Shinji glared at Barrel, gritting his teeth through the pain. Letting your servant hunt civilians in the city. You. Are you the bastard behind the recent murders? Oh, figured it out that fast? As expected of a magus in the Holy Grail War. Sharp one, Barrel said, tilting his head slightly. The moonlight reflected off his glasses, hiding his eyes behind a ghostly white gleam. Master, Ryder said calmly, he's an evil that needs to be dealt with here and now. We can't let the damage from the Holy Grail War spread further through the city. But Shinji showed no intention of agreeing. If anything, he liked Barrel's methods. That's how the Holy Grail War should be, in his mind. Ignorant civilians should just quietly become fodder for the servants. If only his own servant weren't so self-righteous. And if he didn't mind wasting a command spell. He would have ordered Ryder to do the same a long time ago. So? What now, Ryder's master? Gonna take me on? Barrel was still grinning, though he made no effort to conceal his bloodlust. Shinji glanced at his wounded arm, then flicked his hand. Another swarm of bladed insects burst forth. By the time Barrel and Assassin cut down the last of them, Ryder and Shinji were already gone. TCH. Took the injury as an excuse and ran off, huh? Barrel kept laughing. Not quite what I planned, but that's the Holy Grail War for you. As long as I get to kill my way, I don't really care how. Shall we pursue them, Magus? Assassin asked respectfully. No need. Take your time. Keep hunting civilians and devouring souls. You're too weak. At this rate, you'll never beat the other servants. Barrel turned on his heel and left the scene without hesitation. Neither he nor Shinji noticed the eyes watching from above. As expected. The serial killings in Fuiuki are the work of the participants. Perched atop a utility pole, Seal muttered to herself. Since the fighting began last night, she had been patrolling the city and cleaning up the aftermath. She had just finished reviewing the destruction at the seaside park and was on her way back to the church when she came upon this scene. And overheard enough to understand what was happening. As the overseer for the Holy Church, she couldn't intervene directly. Otherwise, she would have taken advantage of Ryder's retreat to strike. After a brief moment of thought, the young overseer made her decision. I need to find a way to handle this. Chapter 164, though it was called a land of nothingness, that didn't mean it was peaceful. In fact, there wasn't even water here. So the idea of stillness, of calm waves, didn't apply at all. In the land of shadows, anything tied to life simply didn't exist. There were only things related to death. Wraiths. Spirits. The dead. Most importantly, the very concept of death seemed to endlessly attract and cluster together. Weak souls, aimless and unconscious, would drift toward one another. And with the divine level mana saturating this realm, those gatherings would, from time to time, give rise to monstrous entities. It was ironic. In a place with no concept of life, something new could still be born from countless deaths. Shiomi sat on a boulder atop a hillside, resting while mulling over which direction to resume his pursuit. In front of him, a campfire flickered, lit with rune stones. He wasn't cold, but he thought the flames added to the whole hunting and camping atmosphere. Today's task, or training, depending on how one looked at it, was to eliminate the monster formed from the aggregated undead. Normally, this would be the job of Skaithak, the queen of the land of shadows and Shiomi's teacher. But now that her disciple was nearly fully trained, Skaithak had given him a choice. Either continue training as usual, or go handle these things in her place. Leaving them alone wouldn't cause any real harm to the land of shadows. But just like how the occasional living person might stray into this realm and die from the environment, sometimes undead drifted outward. Individually, they weren't much. But when a massive number clustered together, they'd start craving the living. Even without a solid form, their vague unity would cause them to scatter, leave the land of shadows, and regroup elsewhere. So, it was best to eliminate them early. That was one of the few duties assigned to the Queen of Shadows. Oh? You've already made it this far. A bit more effort and you'll be right on top of them, came a familiar voice from behind. Shiomi didn't even look back. Didn't you say you were leaving this to me? Why tag along? Don't trust me? Don't take it that way, Skaithak replied, strolling up beside him. It gets kind of boring when you're not in the castle. Wandering that forest is a waste of time. Watching you fight sounded way more entertaining. Shiomi's eye twitched. Am I your idea of fun now, master? You're only realizing that now. Skaithak said nonchalantly. Teaching you these past years has been the most fun I've had. It's actually made things a little less dull. Oh, well. Fair enough, Shiomi muttered with a shrug. Mind if I sit here? She asked. But before he could answer, she was already sitting down beside him, reaching toward the fire as if they were on a leisurely camping trip. So? Going smoothly? Skaithak asked. More or less. The mana density here's interfering with my ability to sense the undead. Makes sense, though. It's just a physical manifestation of the greater source, Shiomi replied honestly. Though, how did you find me so fast? I know everything that happens in the land of shadows, she said. My domain doesn't stop at the castle. So impressive. I'm joking, Skaithak said, ruffling his hair with a fond smile. I've just been keeping an eye on you. Shiomi blinked in surprise. Huh? In the past, I've taken several disciples. I always foresaw their deaths. Their ends, Skaithak said gently. But you're different. I don't know where you came from, and I can't see where you'll end up. Her hand lingered on his head, lazily running through his hair as she spoke. So I couldn't help getting a little curious, Skaithak said, a faint, indescribable smile tugging at her lips. I don't even know myself, Shiomi replied with a dry chuckle and a shrug. But if you hadn't taken me in, master, I'd have died here and just become another wandering soul. Would you have? You'd already lasted quite a long time before that, Skaithak said as she lowered her hand and naturally leaned against him, her violet hair cascading over his shoulder like a silken curtain. Master. Even through the thin fabric of his clothes, he could feel her body's warmth. He didn't deny that his heart had started to race. He just didn't know what the right thing to do was. What's the matter? Aren't you here to tell me to hurry up and finish the job so I can get back to the castle and take my beating? Shiomi cleared his throat and looked away. No need to rush. Go at your own pace. A first-rate warrior doesn't need someone telling him what to do, Skaithak said, raising a finger in front of him. So I'm already first-rate? Shiomi let out a laugh. I don't raise second-rates, she replied, lowering her hand. If you're not in a hurry, rest a little longer. I'll take a rare nap myself. Shiomi blinked. You sleep, master? When I feel like it. Though really, it's more of a self-suggestion than actual sleep, she said, closing her eyes. You're in charge of keeping watch now, foolish disciple. Still, is there really anything in the land of shadows that could kill you? Shiomi muttered, skeptical. If something could kill me, let it, Skithak said softly, her voice beginning to fade. Though, maybe it'd be best if it were you. And just like that, she drifted off to sleep. Me? Kill master? Shiomi murmured, frowning as he accidentally snapped the dry twig in his hand. Don't be ridiculous. Who would ever do that? He thought quietly to himself. He'd try anything if it was her wish or command. But not this. That was the one line he couldn't cross. She wants to die. But I want her to live. Maybe. That would be one of the rare things they'd disagree on. He gently reached out and wrapped his arms around her as she slept upright, pulling her into his embrace. Shiomi knew very well, to him, his master was not just a master. He couldn't even say when he began to see her as a woman. Maybe it had started that very moment. When she descended before him like a goddess, just as he was about to give in to despair. So, if he went just a little too far, would she scold him? That thought suddenly crossed his mind. And then he acted on it. He lowered his head, slowly, inch by inch, and softly kissed her lips. They were warm. Soft. Shiomi lingered there for a moment, wishing that instant could last forever. Chapter 165, 2 days had passed since the onset of the Holy Grail War. That morning, as Shiomi was going about his usual preparations at home, he received an unexpected visitor. Seal? Seeing the young nun standing outside the courtyard, Shiomi was momentarily speechless. Just as I suspected. After examining the traces at the seaside park, I concluded that one of the combatants in that battle was you, Mr. Shiomi, Seal said, her expression calm. It's been a while. How have you been? Though uncertain of her intentions, Shiomi knew it was unrealistic to think he could completely conceal his involvement. As long as he avoided contact with other masters and servants, he might stay under the radar, but once interactions occurred, anyone with a keen sense for information would notice. Still, I'm surprised you managed to find this place, Shiomi remarked. It wasn't too difficult. After forming my hypothesis, I reviewed Fuiuki City's property records, Seal explained. In addition to your original residence, you purchased this new home a few years ago. I decided to take a chance and came here. Shiomi raised an eyebrow. So, you're not here just as a friend dropping by. I've come in my capacity as the overseer dispatched by the Holy Church for the Fifth Holy Grail War. I have matters to discuss. He nodded and opened the gate. Please, come in. If you don't mind. Seal followed Shiomi into the house and into the living room. Morgan was there, sipping tea. Upon seeing Seal, she gave a slight nod in greeting. In truth, Seal had only met Morgan once or twice before and knew her merely as Shiomi's wife. After sitting down, Seal took a sip of tea and got straight to the point. You've likely seen the news. There's been a series of murders in Fuiuki City recently. We're aware, Shiomi acknowledged. What are your thoughts on the matter, Mr. Shiomi? Seal asked abruptly. Shiomi leaned forward slightly, resting his arm on the table. Without any concrete information, it's generally best to treat it as a typical violent crime and leave it to the police or other law enforcement agencies. Generally speaking. Seal adjusted her glasses. Yes, generally speaking, Shiomi replied, resting his chin on one hand. As you know, I participated in the Fourth Holy Grail War. I'm sure you've seen the Holy Church's records. During that war, there were instances where individuals with latent magecraft abilities were granted command spells by the Holy Grail to serve as masters, essentially to fill the ranks. Seal nodded deeply. I recall. One such individual was Rinasuk Ryulu. According to post-war investigations, he came from a family that once had a lineage of magi, though it had since died out. Based on that experience, I suspect a similar situation might be occurring now, Shiomi said. However, lacking definitive evidence, I had planned to investigate further during the day. But now, that seemed unnecessary. Seal's deliberate mention of the murder cases was a clear indication that they were connected to a master participating in the Holy Grail War. Contrary to that, the master responsible for these serial killings is well versed in the Holy Grail War, Seal stated. They're intentionally committing murders to have their servant consume the victim's souls, thereby increasing their own power. Have you identified which group it is? Morgan interjected. While the question was posed, the process of elimination had already narrowed it down to essentially two possibilities. The assassin faction, Seal replied. Perhaps they chose this tactic because their servant is too weak compared to other classes. What's the Holy Church planning to do? Shiomi looked at her. With your strength, it wouldn't be hard to eliminate Assassin's Master, right? That would break the rules, Seal said with a wry smile. Don't be fooled by how I seem. I actually follow the rules pretty closely. And after what happened in the last Holy Grail War, the Church has put much stricter regulations in place. So? Shiomi already knew the answer. Seal sat upright on the mat, her expression serious. On behalf of the church and in my own capacity, I want to commission you to handle this, Mr. Shiomi. As you know, the command spells left over from previous Holy Grail wars were all lost during the last war. So unlike before, we can't issue an official subjugation order and lure other masters to prioritize dealing with the assassin faction. And what do we gain by taking down Assassin's Master? Shiomi asked. To be honest, not much, Seal admitted after a pause. But you're not officially part of this Holy Grail war. Technically, your involvement is already a breach. At that moment, Morgan smiled dangerously. Then we just have to silence the one person who knows, and no one will be aware of our existence. That might work, but if I die, the intel I've gathered will be released to the Holy Church, Seal responded calmly. Mr. Shiomi, I doubt you want to bring the full wrath of the Church and the Mages Association down on yourself. That would go against your usual methods. She clearly understood Tenkai Shiomi's principles and presented her request in the most diplomatic way, laying out the stakes and consequences. So you're saying that if I accept your commission and eliminate the assassin faction, you'll turn a blind eye to what we're doing? Shiomi caught on immediately. Exactly. That's a fair trade. Shiomi shrugged. Honestly, even if Seal hadn't said anything, he would have gone after the assassin faction for Sakura's sake. So, do you know where their base is? Unfortunately not. I tried tracking them, but I was worried about alerting them, so I couldn't follow through, Seal said, bowing her head slightly. With an assassin capable of concealing their presence, Seal couldn't afford to follow too closely. Otherwise, she'd be exposed before getting anywhere. So we're starting from scratch, Shiomi crossed his arms. Well, it's just getting back to the old routine. Tracking and investigation were areas Shiomi had some skill in. After they reached an agreement, Seal expressed her thanks and left Shiomi's new hideout. Worked out just right for us, huh, my dear? Morgan teased as Shiomi cleared away the tea set. Well, the Overseer is still a burial agency executor. They can't just ignore our actions. That'd be a problem. After all, if even someone from the burial agency ended up dead while supervising the Holy Grail War, the implications would be obvious. Chapter 166, Hey, did you hear? Something happened at the seaside park near the big bridge. I heard it was an explosion caused by a gas pipe leak underground. I even cut out the photo from the newspaper. Look. Whoa, that's terrifying. After school at Hamurahara Academy, Rin Tasaka overheard students chatting on their way home as she stepped out of the classroom. By this time, there were barely any students left in the school building. Starting today, the school had issued a notice. Students without club activities were to go home immediately, and even those with clubs had to shorten their activities and avoid spending too much time off campus. The recent string of serial murders couldn't be fully covered up. Even if the truth was hidden, the consequences were undeniable. Given the threat to public safety, this was the school's only option. As for the topic those students were discussing, Rin wasn't about to accept it at face value. The gas explosion was just a smokescreen. The truth was that a skirmish between factions had broken out there after the Holy Grail War began. At least no civilians had been caught in the crossfire, suggesting the Magi involved knew how to keep the supernatural under wraps. With that in mind, Rin planned to head to the seaside park with Sakura and their servants to investigate. As she descended the stairs and crossed the hallway toward Sakura's classroom, she spoke without looking back. Something you need, Matu? She addressed the figure leaning against the corridor window behind her. Nothing much. Just saying hi, Shinji replied with a grin. Did you hear? Even our school's talking about the Holy Grail War now. So what? The Holy Church and the Mages Association are handling cleanup. As long as civilians aren't affected, let people gossip all they want. Rin shifted slightly, watching Shinji with caution. Archer was nearby, so she wasn't worried about Shinji ordering an attack. Still, looks like you're taking part in the Holy Grail War after all, huh, Matu? Rin said. I heard from Uncle Karaya that the Matu family's magecraft ended with him. If you've got no aptitude, it's best to back out early. Shinji's smile faltered. Is that your advice? Out of respect for my uncle? Of course. Uncle Karaya still cared about you. Too bad the Matu family kicked him out, Rin said. That was my grandfather's decision. I was just a kid. I couldn't do anything about it, Shinji said with an innocent expression. In truth, Karaya being cast out was what allowed him. Someone without magic aptitude to undergo skin's transformation. For someone like Shinji, obsessed with magecraft since childhood, it was exactly what he wanted. Keeping quiet about it was the best outcome. If someone couldn't understand the nobility of magecraft lineage, even a qualified uncle wasn't worth his attention. So you waited here just to tell me that? Rin asked skeptically. Well, like the fight that broke out at the seaside park, I ran into another faction last night too, Shinji said smugly, running a hand through his hair, carefully omitting the part where he got ambushed and had to retreat wounded. "Oh, is that so?" Rin wasn't the least bit interested and was about to turn away. Shinji Mito had pestered her more than once before, but she'd shut him down every time. So even as a fellow master, Rin didn't bother wasting words on him. "No alliance?" Shinji suddenly asked. "What?" Rin frowned. "I know about Sakura Shiomi. She's your sister, right?" "She was sent away when she was still a kid," Shinji said with a grin. "But in the end, she's no longer a magus of the Tasaka family." He exaggeratedly stretched out a hand in an inviting gesture. "Don't forget why the Holy Grail War ritual in Fuiuki was established in the first place. We're both from the original 3 families. Instead of letting the Grail fall into the hands of outsiders, how about we team up to eliminate the other factions first, and then deal with each other afterward?" Shinji's speech sounded so righteous he almost convinced himself. But Rin remained completely unmoved. "You say that like you already know you can't win with your own servant," she said, turning around and placing a hand on her hip. "I don't know what state the Matu family's magecraft is in, but if it's barely made it to your generation, I doubt it's worth much." "Tasaka." Shinji's expression twisted as she struck a nerve, his friendly mask dropping to reveal his irritation. "Listen carefully, Matu. It's true Sakura was sent away when she was very young, but she's more of a magus than you. And even more than me," Rin said with a hint of pride. "As one of the original 3 families, this is the only advice I'll give you: drop out of the Holy Grail War now. It's better for the Mata family not to end here." Just like always, Shinji had approached her full of confidence, only to be completely dismantled by Rin. This time was no different. "Tasaka!" Shinji snapped, shouting in anger as insects burst from the shadows. "You want to fight? Fine by me." Even before they started talking, Rin had already clenched a jewel in her hand. In the narrow hallway, she could feel countless tiny mana signatures, both visible and hidden. They were all insects, no doubt products of the Matu family's insect magecraft. Before she even considered how troublesome they might be, she already felt completely disgusted. Archer couldn't come to her aid. He was probably being held off by Shinji's servant. "Then I'll..." Shinji raised his hand, just about to command the insects to attack, when something shocking happened. Behind Rin, a girl suddenly leapt high into the air, immense mana gathering in her hands. The surge of danger made Shinji instinctively change tactics, hastily ordering the insects to form a shield against the oncoming blast of pure mana. Rin didn't even have time to turn around. She threw her arms up and reinforced her body with mana, or else the shockwave would have launched her 7 or 8 meters down the hall. The cluster of insects was obliterated by Sakura's concentrated mana blast. The rest immediately lost control and scattered. The corridor walls on both sides were torn apart, and the glass windows shattered. When the dust settled, Mata Shinji was nowhere to be seen. "So this is the Mata family's magecraft? They sure are good at running away." Sakura landed beside Rin with a sigh. "Are you okay, sister?" "I'm fine." Rin brushed the dust off herself and pocketed the jewel. She hadn't expected Sakura to come looking for her just because she was a bit late. Well, at least she didn't have to waste a jewel. As soon as Shinji realized it was about to become a 2-on-1, he retreated without a second thought. Chapter 167, Seriously, that servant sure ran fast. Took off before we even started fighting. As they walked toward the seaside park, Saber rested her arms behind her head, grumbling with a bored expression. Back at the building entrance, Saber had sensed a servant battle taking place at the school. Sakura had immediately sent her to investigate while she went upstairs to look for her sister. "What kind of servant was it, Archer?" Rin asked her own servant, who had engaged the enemy directly. Archer paused to think. "He was wearing a mask, but I could tell. He seemed like the refined and skilled type, very handsome, with a gentle presence. But there's no doubt, he's a genuine hero." "So, completely different from Mitukan," Rin guessed. "Pretty much," Archer nodded. Sakura spoke thoughtfully. "I wonder what class he belongs to. And what his true name might be. As for the true name, I'd say it's probably Perseus." Archer thought for a moment before stating it outright. Saber let out a surprised gasp. "Perseus? The hero from Greek mythology who slew Medusa?" In Mordred's era, Greek myths were ancient history, and even in Britannia, such stories had only been passed down through outsiders. "What's your reasoning?" Rin asked. "The weapon he used in the fight was the divine sword used to look at Medusa." "Harp, the one he got from Hermes," Archer replied. "According to myth, Harp was shaped like a sickle. It wasn't outstanding as a weapon or noble phantasm, but it had the ability to nullify immortality. Wounds inflicted by it couldn't heal." "Impressive that you recognized it," Saber remarked. Rin tapped her chin. "So, are you a Greek hero?" "Maybe. I just remember that sword clearly," Archer replied with a shrug. "So far, Archer had claimed he'd lost all memories of his life due to the summoning ritual. Sakura and Saber were both aware of this. Huh. I see. Rin couldn't find any flaws in his story and decided to let it go for now. If his true name is Perseus, and we consider the remaining classes, Sakura continued, not too concerned about the issue itself, then he must have been summoned under the rider class. That's the only logical option, Rin agreed. After all, there's no record of Perseus being famous for spear techniques. On the contrary, he's known for the winged sandals that allowed him to fly. Flight via noble phantasm has been a common trait among riders in past Holy Grail wars. But the class isn't the main issue. The real point is, if he's truly Perseus, Archer said, then he definitely possesses more than one noble phantasm. A drop of cold sweat rolled down Rin's cheek as she smiled with a hint of tension. In that case, Matu really landed himself a top-tier servant. No complaints in terms of power or fame. More importantly, even with his true name exposed, it wouldn't help in pinpointing any weaknesses. Perseus was one of the few Greek heroes whose story ended happily. A weak opponent would be boring anyway. It's better this way, Saber said with an easygoing smile. Faced with Saber's fearless attitude, Sakura could only respond with a wry smile. With a servant like that, she'd just have to be even more cautious herself. The group wrapped up their discussion about Perseus, left the school, took the bus, and arrived at the seaside park. Due to the earlier battle, the area was cordoned off, but there were no police on site. Only a parked construction vehicle and a few maintenance workers on break. Avoiding their line of sight, Sakura and Rin led their servants into the park. Once inside, they split into two teams and began investigating from opposite sides. Whoosh, what a flashy fight, Saber said with a snap of her fingers. Sakura stood on the damaged concrete road, gazing at the large and small craters. It's been nearly a day, but there's still a strong residue of magical energy lingering here. As she spoke, she pointed towards several marks that were clearly left by weapons. And these damaged areas are very likely. Sakura suddenly paused, her words trailing off as she froze in place. Saber tilted her head, confused. What's wrong, Master? Aren't these all traces left by spear-like weapons? In other words, the servant who fought here yesterday was likely a lancer. Yeah, you're right. Sakura crouched down to examine a broken lamppost that had yet to be cleared from the roadside. But if one of them was a lancer, what class was the other servant? Huh? Saber was caught off guard by the question. It was only then she realized all the visible damage pointed to a single type of weapon. Could it be lancer and caster? Mordred chimed in, noticing remnants of magecraft around the area. Probably, Sakura murmured in agreement. She studied the traces again, her mind drifting toward an unsettling thought she couldn't yet confirm. If these marks were left by a lancer's weapon, that would be one thing. The issue was, they looked familiar to her. They resembled the weapon her father once used. Gaibolg alternative. For some reason, Sakura's instincts were screaming at her, hinting at what kind of weapon had been used on this battlefield. She couldn't say for certain whether her father had returned to Fuyuki, or if a servant with a similar origin had been summoned as Lancer in this Holy Grail war. Logically, she knew it couldn't be her father. The clock tower was about to hold the grand roll. There was no way he could be here right now. But emotionally, she couldn't shake the doubt. There aren't any signs of injuries nearby. Seems like whoever fought here made sure not to involve civilians. I've gotta admit, I respect that, Saber said. They probably set an ambush beforehand and cast a repelling barrier, Sakura replied, rising to her feet. It's a basic skill for any magus in the Holy Grail War. Involving regular people would be unforgivable. Hey! Saber flashed a toothy grin. Then let's get moving and track down that bastard who's been killing people in the city. You said you suspect it's a master and servant pair, right? I'll take out anyone who tramples on human life like that with my own hands. Don't worry, I'm already doing my best to investigate that, Your Majesty, Sakura said as she stood up. Eh? Saber blinked. Was that not the right way to address you? Sakura asked with mock innocence. And no. It's fine, Saber said, wiping her nose with a casual flick of her finger. But before that, I need to head home. There's something I have to look into. Sakura turned to look at her sister, who was walking toward them. It was morning in London now. Either Karan or Gray should already be up. Chapter 168. According to the intel from Seal, the assassin's master had mistakenly attacked Ryder's master in Shinto, thinking he was just an ordinary civilian. So after nightfall, Shiomi headed to Shinto with Morgan. But even after over an hour of thorough patrol in the quiet, late-night city, the two found nothing. Neither Shiomi nor Morgan could sense any sign of a servant's presence. Looks like after the mishap during last night's ambush, Assassin's Master has started being more careful, Morgan said, perched on the rooftop railing, gazing sideways at the nightscape of Shinto. That's the only reasonable conclusion, Shiomi replied, standing beside her and looking out over the city gradually settling into silence. The battles at the church and the seaside park were basically a public announcement. The Holy Grail War is officially underway. A day has passed. Anyone who needs to know should know by now. He extended his hand as he spoke. In that case, let's wrap it up for tonight. Morgan accepted his hand and rose gracefully to her feet. It's still a bit of a walk back to Mama Town. Want to head straight home or take a stroll? Shiomi asked. After all, it was his personal reasons that had brought Morgan back to Fuyuki. And it was also because he accepted the overseer's request that he had her out patrolling on a freezing winter night like this. Even though she was technically a servant, Shiomi couldn't help feeling a little guilty and wanted to make it up to her somehow. Let's walk. If we suppress our magical energy, who knows? We might stumble onto something interesting, Morgan said with a nod and a teasing smile, suggesting they use themselves as bait. I suppose that could work, Shiomi chuckled. The two left the building and followed the road toward Fuyuki Bridge, planning to cross it on foot and walk all the way home. As they gazed at the Mayan River in the dead of night, memories of the brutal battle that took place here 10 years ago resurfaced, making them pause by the railing, lost in thought. Looking downstream toward Mama Town, they could see the ruined remnants of the seaside park and the construction vehicles halted for the night, the area still cordoned off with warning tape. We should have lured Lancer out onto the river to fight, Shiomi said. You think that would have worked? Kuchilane isn't Artoria. You can't assume he can walk on water, Morgan replied. As someone summoned under the Lancer class, he probably can't fully wield his rune magic. Yeah, Shiomi agreed with a nod. Even if they managed to defeat Lancer at full strength in this Holy Grail War, it wouldn't mean much. As a servant, Kuchilane would be limited by his class, unable to fully access the power he had in life. Just thinking about it made Shiomi feel a sudden hollowness toward the battle he had anticipated with Lancer. But that emptiness didn't last long. In the dead silence of the night, a distant scream suddenly echoed from the direction of Shinto. It was faint, easy to miss as it blended into the wind. Shiomi and Morgan exchanged a look, then immediately turned and sprinted toward the source of the sound. They ran down from the bridge, following the road. The traces of magical energy were faint, like ink diluted in the ocean. Spread thin and disappearing if one wasn't careful. But the next moment, an even stronger surge of magical energy erupted. It was the presence of a servant. Yet it was so overwhelming that Shiomi couldn't believe it was the assassin responsible for the recent attacks on civilians, devouring their souls. If anything, that raw, unrestrained aura felt familiar. Like something he'd sensed before. After winding through several narrow alleys, they finally found the source of the sound. Hidden in the shadows between two buildings. A woman lay slumped in a dim corner, barely conscious, her life hanging by a thread. But what caught their attention even more was the figure standing beside her. Golden light shimmered off the person's form. Even in the unlit alley, it couldn't be concealed. Shiomi's pupils narrowed. The crimson magic spear appeared in his hand in an instant as he and Morgan stood side by side, ready to confront the golden figure. Gilgamesh? Shiomi spoke the name cautiously, wary of the formidable enemy it represented. Gilgamesh, having also noticed Shiomi and Morgan's arrival, looked over with a dangerous gleam in his eye and a touch of amusement. Oh? So you recognize this king? Seems you're not just some worthless mongrel after all. That arrogant tone, the way he looked down on others. It was exactly how Shiomi remembered him. A servant? How? In the last Holy Grail War, I was sure Shiomi raised his magic spear, mana swirling intensely around the shaft. So, what's your move? Gilgamesh laughed dismissively, provoking him with ease. You've beaten me once. Don't tell me you've lost your nerve now that I've returned? Is that so? Well, I guess there's no avoiding it. Shiomi tightened his grip on the spear, signaling to Morgan behind him. As always, he would go on the offensive while Morgan held the rear. Sensing the surge of battle intent from the two, Gilgamesh let out a derisive chuckle. One after another, golden portals opened behind him. It's a bit cramped here, but that won't matter for long. This place will open up soon enough. Just like in the Fourth Holy Grail War 10 years ago, there was no time to question why Gilgamesh was here again. Shiomi's focus was on eliminating the enemy before him. Wait. A clear female voice rang out, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Morgan turned around. A girl with long brown hair stood there, hands on her knees, clearly out of breath from running. On the back of her exposed left hand, 3 command spells were clearly visible. You're late, Hakuno. This king has no interest in fighting while babysitting a fainted woman. As if the intent to fight had never existed, Gilgamesh casually closed the gates of his noble phantasms. There was no doubt. The girl named Hakuno was Gilgamesh's master. Pretty sure you were the one who provoked them first. Hakuno stood up straight and muttered dryly. Ha. Not wrong. But it's this guy we're talking about. Can you blame me for being a little curious? Gilgamesh remained as smug as ever, but his tone was unexpectedly cooperative. That contrast made Shiomi pause. Re-examining the king of heroes, even his fashion sense seemed different. Gone was the gaudy, twisted luxury. His look now carried a refined, understated elegance, surprisingly in sync with Hakuno's style. You're the master of the king of heroes? Morgan asked, clearly surprised. The girl placed her left hand over her chest, studying her breath as she showed the command spells. Yes. My name is Hakuno Kishinami. Due to some unexpected events, I ended up in this city. Then, looking at both of them seriously, Hakuno Kishinami added, the police are on their way. Please, put away your weapons for now. Chapter 169. As it turned out, the woman lying in the alley hadn't been attacked by Gilgamesh. He and his master, Hakuno Kishinami, had simply heard her scream and arrived before Shiomi and the others. Gilgamesh stayed behind to secure the scene, while Hakuno ran off to find a nearby patrol officer. I didn't think you'd let your master act alone under these circumstances, Shiomi said, still eyeing Gilgamesh with suspicion. Aren't you worried she'll be targeted by the servants who just attacked a civilian? After handing the unconscious woman over to the police for protection, the group left Shindo and headed toward the banks of the Mayan River. My master isn't so fragile, Gilgamesh replied nonchalantly, even sounding somewhat smug, as if showing off a prized possession. Morgan took a moment to study Hakuno. Though she looked like an ordinary magus, there was definitely something guarding her. Perhaps a noble phantasm from Gilgamesh's treasury. If that was the case, not even an assassin-type servant would be able to harm her. Now then, let's get back on topic, Morgan said. You two aren't participants in this Holy Grail war, are you? Hakuno hesitated before nodding. She was trying to figure out how to explain it. After all, during interstellar travel, they had been caught in a temporal disturbance and swept into a Japanese city in the year 2004. Right in the middle of a Holy Grail war. Up to now, Hakuno suspected the Holy Grail war itself might be the reason she and Gilgamesh had ended up here. You say that, but the same goes for you too. You're not part of this Holy Grail war either, Gilgamesh retorted without backing down. From what I see, you're a servant who remained after the last Grail war, aren't you, Fairy of Paradise? Just like 10 years ago, the Golden Man used that same title. I'm impressed you knew that, Shiomi said. Ever since 10 years ago, he had suspected there was something unusual about Gilgamesh's clairvoyance. It could perceive things beyond the future. For instance, Gilgamesh had once hinted at Shiomi's origin in the Land of Shadows. Don't think defeating a careless version of me means you'll win again, Gilgamesh declared from atop the river bank. Even if I only wield a tenth of my treasures, I'm not someone you can afford to underestimate. Hakuno smiled awkwardly. Well, it's true Gilgamesh has been pretty lax lately. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten dragged into this mess. Hakuno, you little rascal, Gilgamesh laughed heartily, ruffling the girl's hair. You've gotten bold. Looks like broadening your horizons has helped you grow a lot, ha ha ha. He really wasn't the same king of heroes he once knew, Shiomi thought to himself. So, king of heroes, are you planning to intervene in this Holy Grail war? Morgan asked. Well, that's... Hakuno was surprisingly hesitant. I've got no interest in the Grail, Gilgamesh said, and my master doesn't care either. So we'll just watch from the sidelines. Besides, the Holy Grail here had the sense to assign me the ruler class. Shiomi was shocked. Ruler? He wasn't surprised Gilgamesh qualified for that role. After all, according to numerous legends and magical texts, the King of Heroes was indeed worthy of being a judge of human history. What caught him off guard was that a ruler had actually been inserted into this particular Grail war. No need to be so surprised, Shiomi, Gilgamesh said. You should know exactly why a ruler gets summoned. First, because the structure of this Holy Grail war is extremely unusual, with an unknown outcome. Second, because its effects could potentially distort the world itself. Of course I know why a ruler would be summoned. But this Holy Grail war is more stable than the last one, even the corruption of the Greater Grail has been purified. I just can't see a reason for a ruler to appear. Shiomi stared directly at Gilgamesh, refuting his point. You've already met Castor, haven't you? Gilgamesh cut him off. The man with eyes that pierce through past and future. The so-called king of magecraft. That single line left Shiomi at a loss for words. Unlike me, that man doesn't change his stance depending on the situation. Gilgamesh grinned, clearly amused. Summoned as a servant, he'll fully commit to fulfilling his master's needs. In other words, within the Holy Grail war, the King of Magecraft was an even greater threat than the King of Heroes. Even the King of Heroes himself acknowledged that. After all, Xiaomi could still sense the difference between the two Gilgameshes. The previous one had treated everything like a game until the very end. But this one, despite his diminished power, was in an unmistakably serious mode. In fact, upon closer consideration, Xiaomi thought this version of Gilgamesh might be even harder to deal with. By contrast, the King of Magecraft didn't have an on or off switch. As a servant, he was always serious, following his master's orders and suggestions to the letter and executing them flawlessly. So you're saying the reason you were given the ruler class is because of that? Morgan asked. You'd know best, Witch of Britannia, Gilgamesh replied. You didn't even flinch when you heard your opponent was the King of Magecraft, did you? Humphrey. Morgan chuckled softly but didn't deny it. And that made the answer crystal clear. If only the King of Magecraft had shown up, the Holy Grail War's outcome would have been set in stone. But the arrival of Xiaomi and Morgan made things unpredictable. The Greater Grail decided a judge was needed. That judge was Gilgamesh. You've already met the King of Magecraft? Xiaomi asked again. Had no choice. That guy's a stickler for rules. My master and I had just gotten a foothold here when he showed up, Gilgamesh said, looking increasingly pleased. So I gave him a little tip. Shared some info about you lot. No wonder casters showed up back then. So it wasn't just a random intrusion onto the battlefield, Xiaomi muttered, feeling a headache coming on. Gilgamesh turned away. Struggle all you like. Whether it's the King of Magecraft or you who wins, I'll act as the judge and award the Holy Grail to the victor. Hakuno, who hadn't taken a single step, put her hands together and bowed slightly to the two of them, a silent apology that said she had no control over Gilgamesh whatsoever. Don't worry about it. With a servant like that, I'm more inclined to sympathize with you, Morgan said kindly. Ha ha ha. Hakuno gave a strained laugh. Just then, Gilgamesh called out, if you don't start moving, I'll just leave you here, prompting Hakuno to quickly say her goodbyes and follow after him. As he watched them go, Xiaomi's mind was already elsewhere. Besides the King of Magecraft, now we've got the King of Heroes acting as ruler. His head was starting to ache. Chapter 170, Slurp. The hot noodle slid down Xiaomi's throat, settling warmly in his stomach. Instantly, he felt revived. He took another sip of the fresh broth. It was just a simple bowl of bone broth noodles, but on a cold winter night, it hit the spot perfectly. Lifting his gaze, he glanced at Morgan. She was also quietly savoring the noodles he had made. The broth came from the leftover stock at dinner, and the noodles were handmade earlier that day. If not for the Holy Grail War, spending a few quiet days in Fuyuki with Morgan like this would have been exactly what Xiaomi wanted. How is it? Xiaomi asked. Tastes just like always. Like something you'd find at an old, long-established shop, Morgan replied calmly, pausing with her spoon. Well, that makes sense. I have been eating it for years. Haha. Xiaomi let out an awkward chuckle. He hadn't expected Morgan to share the same appreciation for these small comforts. Their patrol through the city had yielded nothing beyond encountering ruler Gilgamesh and his master, so they'd returned home. Feeling hungry, Xiaomi made some soup noodles as a late-night snack. And to warm up. Unlike magical cold resistance, the warmth from food gave a completely different kind of comfort. On TV, the late-night news was playing, but there was nothing new to report. It was as if the Holy Grail War had never even begun. But thinking about it now, with ruler summoned, it probably means that the moment we set foot back in Fuyuki, we were already part of the Holy Grail War, included by the Greater Grail, Xiaomi said, looking down at his half-eaten noodles. That's a fair interpretation. Apparently, Fuyuki's Grail system can assess exceptional cases, Morgan said, picking at a side dish in the center of the table with her chopsticks. Before we returned, the Grail War was following standard procedure. Even the irregular appearance of that caster wouldn't have disrupted the Grail selection. Though the ritual was created by the Tasaka, Matu, and Innsburn families, it wasn't designed to favor any one of them. Their only advantage was their deep understanding of the system, built up over generations of preparation. That berserker was seriously tough. Even Saber and Archer together couldn't take him down completely, Xiaomi said, recalling their first clash. Perhaps because their attempt to secure victory in the previous war by recruiting outside magi had failed, the Innsburn this time opted for a more controllable Lesser Grail. And summoned a berserker without self-awareness. The previous Saber, Artoria, had ultimately rejected the Grail, choosing instead to help purify the Greater Grail before disappearing. That must have dealt a heavy blow to the Innsburn. Most likely he turned his own legend into a resurrection-type noble phantasm, Morgan said, raising an eyebrow. That berserker must have been quite the warrior in life. Any idea what his true name is? Xiaomi asked, then added. You've got the breadth of knowledge, so I figured you might guess it more easily. Morgan stirred the chopped scallions floating in the soup with her chopsticks. And if I don't know? Then we'll find another way. Shiomi gave up without hesitation. I was just being hopeful. I can't treat you like a walking encyclopedia. You're actually pretty curious, aren't you? Morgan said suddenly. Curious? Shiomi blinked in surprise. About where I came from. And why? I know you so well. For once, Morgan brought up the topic herself. Since the Fourth Holy Grail War, they'd shared an unspoken understanding. Shiomi never asked about Morgan's past, and Morgan never offered it. It wasn't out of secrecy or reluctance, but for a much simpler, and more unsettling reason. That reason was called the future. If you think about it carefully, it's obvious, Shiomi said with a helpless smile. I'd never seen you before the Fourth Holy Grail War, but your reaction back then. You clearly knew who I was. That ruled out the past. And the present they were experiencing. Leaving only the future. The throne of heroes isn't bound by time. As long as the conditions are right, summoning a servant from the future isn't impossible, Morgan said, resting her chin on one hand. As expected of my husband. Sharp intuition. What's there to praise? Shiomi resumed slurping his noodles. Any magus would figure that out eventually. So. That was why Shiomi had asked Morgan earlier. If she really was from the future, she might already know how the Fuiuki Holy Grail War played out. Or perhaps she had other reasons for knowing about the servants involved. So, do you still want to ask? Morgan circled back to the earlier question. Let me confirm something first. Is this part of the result in the quantum fixed record already locked in? Shiomi asked, head lowered. Hard to say, Morgan replied, sounding a little wistful. There's a slight anomaly in this case. In that case, never mind, Shiomi said, giving up on the idea. To him, this was still the present. But for Morgan, it was something akin to reliving the past. If the result was already fixed, then as long as he didn't interfere with it directly, he could still interact with the process. Even so, he wasn't sure whether trying to learn Berserker's true name from Morgan counted as crossing that line. I was just teasing, Morgan suddenly said, reaching over with her chopsticks and plucking a fish cake from Shiomi's bowl. It's just the name of a Greek hero. Heracles might not be your average heroic spirit, but knowing his true name isn't enough to shake the quantum fixed record. Seriously. Shiomi felt like he'd been played. He was frustrated, but powerless to do anything about it. He was always weak against this type of sharp, composed woman. His master had been like that. So was Tuko. Morgan's eyes narrowed, her smile turning sly. Compared to my husband, that so-called great hero still falls far short. What's the point of putting me on a pedestal? Shiomi grumbled, trying to reclaim his fish cake. But his chopsticks were intercepted halfway. Still, looking at it now, the servant lineup this time is insanely strong. Archer's true name remained unknown, but his flexible combat style. Capable of both long and close-range engagement. And the way he used noble phantasms like consumables. If his actual noble phantasm was some kind of armory, it might be able to go toe-to-toe with Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon. So, what's your take? Morgan raised a brow, her expression calm, voice cool as distant mountains. Ultimately, the other servants don't matter. The only real threat is Castor. The king of Magecraft. Don't act like every other hero is just background noise. Shiomi protested. Ugh, forget it. Just eat your noodles before they get soggy. Chapter 171, after their late-night snack, the two of them sat under the kudzu and resumed their earlier discussion. The details of the masters and servants involved in the Holy Grail War weren't something Shiomi needed to concern himself with. He hadn't returned to Fuiuki to compete for the Holy Grail. After learning Castor's true name from BB, he realized that even if she managed to win every other battle, she'd still suffer a crushing defeat against the king of Magecraft. Whether or not Saber could defeat Castor was beside the point. Sakura's Magecraft was completely overwhelmed. Mer Isberry didn't even need to take the field as a master. Shiomi's purpose was simple, to protect Sakura and his family. I've never actually fought the king of Magecraft, Morgan said, stating the facts. So I can't offer any first-hand insight. I figured as much, Shiomi nodded, undeterred. However, my husband did have a brief clash with the king of Magecraft, even though he was rushing to retreat, Morgan added. What's your take on his strength? As she spoke, Shiomi recalled the battle from the day before. Overwhelming. Oh? You're surprisingly lacking in confidence. No, Shiomi replied, analyzing slowly. What I mean is, to modern Magi, the king of Magecraft is like a being from a higher dimension. Bazet was merely trying to launch a sneak attack to open a path for retreat, but Castor completely controlled the battlefield. Her attacks were ineffective, and without any warning, Even a top-ceiling designation executor was stripped of the ability to fight. Just by wearing all those rings on his hands, that man can nullify every form of magecraft a human can wield, Morgan said with a soft smile. Just from that, it's clear. The command spells meant to help masters control their servants in the Holy Grail War are completely useless against Caster. Unlike top-tier magic resistance, which merely deflects magecraft, this was absolute nullification. Any spell would be erased at its inception, as if it had never been cast. Even Morgan would be at a disadvantage against that. Stop. That's enough. Shiomi felt another headache coming on. He had already learned Caster's true name by then. Naturally, he didn't plan to engage in battle after expending his energy, nor did he want to reveal too much. So he had opted to use Grand Magecraft modeled after modern magic. Due to his own unique nature, the spell's power and speed were far beyond the norm. But its foundation was still modern magecraft. And because of that, Caster had effortlessly unraveled the structure of the spell, reducing the entire activation to nothing. Once the war begins, it'll turn into a full-blown battle of Age of Gods magecraft, said Morgan. Shiomi let out a sigh. Yeah. It definitely will. That alone wasn't what truly concerned him. What troubled Shiomi was the king of magecraft's magecraft and noble phantasms. He couldn't gauge the man's true capabilities. Even if servants differ from their legends due to class-based biases, top-tier servants still have the strength to match. Shiomi had clashed with Gilgamesh's trump card Noble Phantasm twice before. The first time, if not for Artoria's holy sword mitigating most of the damage, he was certain his defensive runes, based on primordial magic, would have been completely shredded by EA. The second time, he avoided direct confrontation altogether and relied on trickery, using Artoria's holy sword as bait while simultaneously deploying Avalon to block the attack. Because of that, he had a very clear grasp of just how powerful the strongest noble phantasms could be. And that was why he couldn't predict what might happen if he and Morgan teamed up against the king of magecraft. As expected, there's no way just the two of us can take on Solomon, Shiomi said, lifting his gaze. Now that Caster's true name is known, the other masters won't just stand by and do nothing. Morgan idly rubbed her teacup with her fingers, looking up at Shiomi. She had already guessed what he was thinking. Given our original goal, you want to borrow the strength of another faction to take Caster out early. That way, even if Sakura can't win the later battles, at least she won't lose her life? Exactly. Shiomi nodded. But I've been reviewing the current state of the other factions. For now, Sakura and Rin are out. The Mitamaster doesn't seem stable, and his combat ability is questionable. As for Assassin, not even worth considering. He began analyzing the remaining factions one by one. Berserker, at least, would make a good vanguard against Caster. With someone that tough tanking at the front, Shiomi and Morgan could handle the king of magecraft with less pressure. But there was a problem. Shiomi had once helped Garrett Suguamiya in a mission to Germany to seize Ilyasva. The girl now fighting as Berserker's master was a homunculus created by the Insburn family and modeled after Ilia. There was no doubt that the name Shiomi had been hard-coded into her very being. That much was clear from her surprise assault on the church where Sakura was staying. Rin had probably just been collateral, a secondary target attached to the Insburn mission. By process of elimination, only one choice remained. And it was the most suitable. So in the end, the person you're counting on most is your senior? Morgan's eyes sparkled playfully, as if she'd seen through him from the very start. Shiomi sighed, hand to his forehead. I don't want to rely on him. But I have to. Sakura can't know about this. Why keep it from Sakura? Morgan looked puzzled. If they'd just coordinated with her from the beginning, none of this scheming would be necessary. Why? Shiomi was momentarily speechless. She's 16 now. A proper teenager in the middle of her adolescence. And? Morgan still didn't get it. You haven't raised any kids? Shiomi rubbed his temples. Not at all, Morgan admitted, a little sheepish. The one who had lots of children is the me from over there. In other words, while she had accompanied Sakura and Karin during their upbringing, Morgan herself didn't have any real experience. Many things were new territory for her. I see. He scratched his head and let it go. Morgan viewed things from a different perspective than humans. It was natural she wouldn't grasp everything. It's simple, really. It's just a teenage rebellion. Sakura's caught between childhood and adulthood, and she's bound to be invested in the first major ordeal she's facing alone. Even if that ordeal is the Holy Grail War. If I join the war before her and then try to get involved again, it'll damage her pride. You understand her pretty well. A faint smile touched Morgan's lips. Because all humans go through that kind of growing up. Shiomi rested his arms on the table, looked gently at Morgan, and spoke in a quiet voice. Chapter 172, the next morning, Xiaomi woke up to find his phone had run out of battery, so he quickly plugged it into charge. Ever since the start of the new century, devices like this had advanced rapidly, especially in terms of miniaturization. They were now far more convenient than Magecraft communication. However, the battery was quite durable, so if he wasn't paying attention, he could go 2 or 3 days without charging it. And often forgot. Hence, situations like this would happen. The moment it was plugged in and rebooted, the phone buzzed several times in a row. A number of unread emails popped up. This. After reading through them, Xiaomi was momentarily at a loss for words. "Something happened at the clock tower?" asked Morgan, now dressed, as she walked over. "No, it's just that Sakura's more capable than we expected," Xiaomi said, setting down the phone. She figured out, based on the battle traces at the seaside park, that I might have returned to Fuyuki. Running her fingers through her loose hair, Morgan asked, "So she called London to confirm it?" "Yeah." Xiaomi nodded. Originally, as part of the Drumroll, he and Morgan were meant to follow the magus of the clock tower into the spiritual tomb of Albion. Once inside, ordinary wireless communication would no longer be possible. Yet Sakura had even accounted for that. She called Gray in London directly to inquire. She hadn't chosen El Melito, Rains, or even Karin. Because Xiaomi had already spoken with them, and they could help him cover his tracks. Only Gray was bad at lying. "All the emails were from Gray," Morgan remarked, glancing at the phone screen from beside him. "Too bad the phone probably shut off yesterday evening." Xiaomi sighed and closed the flip cover. Phones back then were still limited in features, with few entertainment options, so he'd gotten used to it and hadn't noticed. "Since we've been exposed, should we go meet Sakura first?" Morgan asked with a playful smile. Xiaomi thought for a moment. "No rush. Let's find Lancer's camp first. If we can work something out with them, it'll make a nice offering when we see Sakura." "That's fine, but you didn't plan on allying with them before. How do you plan to find them?" Morgan asked. "Just so you know, I did send a familiar to keep an eye on Lancer's movements." Sitting back on the bed, Xiaomi thought for a moment before replying, "Still, it shouldn't be too hard. I've lived in Fuyuki long enough to know a thing or two." The day before yesterday, Bayzit came from Shinto, crossed the bridge, and arrived at the seaside park in Mama Town. So her base is probably in Shinto. Shinto's about the same size as Mama Town. "That's like finding a needle in a haystack," Morgan pointed out. "Sealing designation executors all have their quirks. Since she was assigned by the Mages Association, they probably helped her pick a base too." Xiaomi raised a finger. "Besides, Shinto's too modern. A Magus setting up a base in the city would need something like El Meloi had last time. An entire hotel building rented out. But executors didn't have that kind of budget." "If it's not in the city, then where?" Morgan asked, leaning casually against the door. "I don't think I've ever told you this, but there's a Western-style mansion in the forest southwest of the Fuyuki Church," Xiaomi said smugly. "The Adelfeld family's master stayed there during the Third Holy Grail War. They never came back to Fuyuki afterward, so the mansion was turned over to the Mages Association." He shook his head. "Though technically managed by them, they didn't even maintain it. It's practically abandoned, shielded by a barrier, and it's become an urban legend around Fuyuki. A haunted mansion in the woods." "So you think Lancer's master is living there?" Morgan asked. "I just think it's very likely," Xiaomi replied cautiously. "If I were new to Fuyuki, I'd definitely take the Mages Association's recommendation and stay somewhere like that. Perfect for a workshop or to stay hidden." With their plan set, the two had breakfast, then drove from Mama Town toward the forest near Shinto, not far from the church. Fuyuki City, with land managed by the Tasaka family, had Japan's second strongest ley line after Misaki City, which was overseen by the Ozaki family. That's why it could serve as the stage for the Holy Grail War. Though Shinto had developed into a highly modern area, once outside the city and a short drive down the national highway, they reached the southern mountain forests. As their car jolted along a rough forest road, Xiaomi looked out through the windshield. Even in broad daylight, the forest was gloomy. The thick canopy blocked the sunlight, and there was no end in sight. Xiaomi wasn't sure how much farther they could drive before they'd have to continue on foot. Unlike the city, the mana in the forest was noticeably denser. An ideal environment for setting up a Magus workshop. Xiaomi slammed on the brakes. What an overwhelming amount of mana. Morgan had sensed it too. She closed her eyes, focusing on the flow around them. It's not just leaking from a servant. The conclusion was obvious. There's a battle going on. Xiaomi opened the car door and stepped out. The chill and dampness of the forest air pressed directly against his skin as he stood still, listening closely to the sounds deeper in the woods. There was definitely a fight happening. He glanced back at Morgan, who had also exited the car and was already fully geared up. With a wry smile, he said, "Looks like it'll be faster if we go on foot from here." "Then take the first step, my husband. I'll be right behind you." Morgan tested the weight of the magic spear in her hand, then tossed it to Shiomi across the car. The moment he caught it, Shiomi dashed forward and swung the spear into seemingly empty air. A flurry of arrows was knocked aside, their tips embedding in a nearby tree trunk. "That's..." Shiomi stared at the archer who emerged from the shadows of the forest. Clad in green, with a longbow in hand and a quiver at his waist, his figure was cloaked in a mist of mana. "A familiar?" Shiomi frowned. But the aura it gave off was nearly on par with a servant. "Looks like it's confirmed. The King of Magecraft is one of the combatants." Morgan traced her hand across the car's surface, weaving a defensive spell around it. "As for the other side, if your guess is right, my husband..." "Wait, what?" Shiomi was caught off guard. He hadn't expected the situation to escalate this quickly. "That familiar is likely one of the 72 demons commanded by the King of Magecraft." Morgan readied her next spell. "And for the record, this form isn't their true one." Chapter 173, Shiomi's hunch and Morgan's judgment were both spot on. The haunted Western-style mansion in the forest southwest of the Fuiuki Church was indeed Bazit and Lancer's base. And the one who launched the attack against them was Castor Solomon, the King of Magecraft. Though it was technically an assault, it was more accurate to call it a direct and open engagement. At his master Mary's suggestion, Castor made no effort to conceal himself. He simply entered the forest head-on and located their stronghold. He didn't need any reconnaissance. His clairvoyance alone was enough to pinpoint their hideout. TCH. He may look like a Castor, but there's no way he's just some regular magus. The wind howled, turning the area around the mansion into a wreck. Lancer charged across the battlefield, roaring as he launched his attacks at Castor. But Castor's Magecraft gave him no opening to exploit. Offensive spells fired in rapid succession without even a chant. Defensive barriers blocked every thrust of the Crimson Spear, no matter how hard he tried to pierce them. The battle had already dragged on for nearly 10 minutes. Castor remained completely unscathed, while Lancer was left bruised and battered, his injuries all inflicted by a barrage of spells. Even on such uneven, debris-strewn terrain, the blue-clad Castor moved as though walking on flat ground. Meanwhile, he never budged from his position, giving Lancer no chance to find an opening. Only now did Lancer understand. Understand why that guy, his junior, had chosen to retreat the moment he first laid eyes on Castor, rather than join forces with him and Bazit to mount a counterattack. This wasn't an opponent you could defeat by sheer effort or recklessness. Should have asked that guy more. A magus whose true name we don't even know. "He's more troublesome than my own master," Lancer muttered, retreating to the clearing in front of the mansion's main entrance as he watched Castor slowly approach. "Lancer!" Bazit called out from behind. Though her wounds hadn't fully healed, she could at least move around. But if she joined the fight, she'd only be a burden. Not that Lancer was doing much better. His entire body was covered in wounds. "Stay back, Bazit," Lancer said, sweat running down his face. "This isn't a battle you can jump into. If you use Magecraft carelessly, you'll die." He still vividly remembered that battle from the evening before. Shiomi had unleashed 3 grand Magecraft spells in an instant. Every single one had been dispelled by Castor with ease. This guy was the nemesis of Magi. A magus above all others of this era, a legend. A hero whose name was etched into history. Lancer couldn't recall exactly who it was, but he felt he was just a breath away from figuring it out. A cold gust swept through the battlefield. Castor's cloak fluttered gently in the wind. To this point, he hadn't even raised his hands. Kept hidden beneath his robe. And yet, Lancer didn't feel belittled or disrespected. He understood. Castor hadn't gone all out. That's the only reason the fight had lasted this long. Then, a sound stirred from somewhere in the forest, catching Castor's attention. The faint smile on his face gave way to a look of mild surprise. Lancer noticed it too, but he had no time to investigate. Instead, he seized the opportunity. Charging in and thrusting his crimson spear straight at Castor's body. At Lancer's speed, it would take less than a second to strike this mysterious magus. But a surge of icy blue air erupted from Castor, freezing everything it touched, swirling like a raging ice dragon. The dragon's body continued to extend, gaining speed with each second, as if it had just burst from the earth, aiming to engulf Lancer's spear entirely. "I've seen this Magecraft before." Lancer remained unfazed. He spun the crimson spear swiftly in his hand, rotating it inside the ice dragon's body. With massive mana pouring into it, the spear drilled outward, slowly forcing the interior open from within. This was a countermeasure he had devised after fighting Shiomi. Crafted specifically to respond to such Magecraft. It wasn't exactly as expected, but it worked. The ice dragon let out a roar of bitter cold, unleashing a blizzard that could freeze a person solid, then spat out the crimson spear along with a surge of snow. Ugh! Caught off guard, Lancer cried out as he was thrown back violently. Bayzit ducked behind a pillar. The storm of ice swept across the entire mansion. When it finally settled, the entire clearing in front of the building was frozen solid, with the ice dragon's path marking the boundary. Every glass window on the mansion's front had shattered. Without her mana shielding her, Bayzit would have been frozen right along with it all. Lancer let out a grunt and flicked his spear. The ice covering him cracked and flaked away like a broken shell. His eyes widened, veins bulging at the sides of his temples. As the child of light, Cuchulainn understood. This battle could only end in life or death. Either he would defeat Castor here, or he and his master would fall together. And someone would have to come retrieve their corpses afterward. Come to think of it, your master's not here, Lancer said offhandedly. Castor's expression didn't change, he merely shook his head. There's no need for him to be on the front lines. I can handle this. He and I share the same view, Castor replied calmly. Is that so? That's a shame, Lancer muttered as he slowly crouched into position. Although he'd been on the back foot the entire time, perhaps because Castor had shown no aggressive intent, the enemy still stood at a distance. Just at the edge of the clearing, where the forest began. Roughly 100 meters away. In a single breath, Lancer cut the distance in half, then launched himself skyward, narrowly avoiding the ice dragon that charged in once more. He had received permission to use his noble phantasm. A one-on-one fight clearly wasn't going to work. That left only one option. Bite down. Soaring spear that strikes with death. Gaibolg. Pouring all his mana into it, he hurled the spear. Its true form of attack. The moment it left his hand, the magic spear twisted and writhed like a mass of thorns. The spear had branched out into warped shafts, each spawning their own pointed tips. The ice dragon coiled protectively around Castor, forming a towering barricade. But Gaibolg transformed into a dense net of barbed spears, enveloping the entire area around Castor and the ice dragon, unleashing a shockwave that made the forest tremble. Landing back on the ground, Lancer caught the returning spear as it flew back into his hand after the explosion. He clicked his tongue in frustration. The ice dragon had been annihilated. Yet Castor stood completely unharmed. Beneath the icy remains, several immense black shadows had shielded him. As the smoke cleared, those shadows gradually faded, leaving behind a single figure kneeling beside Castor. My king, the demon god stationed in the forest couldn't stop the two intruders. I see. Then let's end this quickly. That's what the master wants as well. Castor let out a quiet sigh. Another spell was already primed. You bastard. Cuchulainn stared at the magic circle, muttering in disbelief. Chapter 174, Summoning Magecraft is the art of calling spiritual entities from the past or future into the present. By invoking and describing beings known as the 72 demons, the king of Magecraft, Solomon, can summon them into the current world as powerful familiars. The heroic spirit summoning system used in the Holy Grail War is, in some sense, also a branch of this type of Magecraft. As the founder who established phenomenon manipulation as a formal branch of Magecraft, the demons commanded by the king of Magecraft are far beyond the scope of typical adversaries. Right now, Shiomi and Morgan were being blocked by several demons sent in advance to monitor the forest's perimeter. Man. These things really come in all shapes and sizes, Shiomi muttered, brushing aside a few arrows fired from deep within the woods as he glanced toward Morgan, who was unleashing spells on the attacking demons. I told you. They're not showing their true forms, Morgan replied, firing spell after spell with no pause. Her Magecraft collided with a demon's attacks, triggering a chain of explosions. That said, I've never actually seen what they truly look like. Only heard rumors. I see. Shiomi held up his magic spear, watching the indistinct figures moving in the fog between the trees. Beyond the green-clad archer who had first appeared, more demons emerged one after another. Some carrying lances, banners, or snakes, one clad in red armor, another with a serpent tail, riding a colorfully patterned steed. They moved in perfect sync. Though they couldn't overpower Shiomi and Morgan, they weren't easy to defeat either. Just thinking that there were 72 of these things made Shiomi feel the weight of the situation. If the king of Magecraft also possessed a reality marble. No. He most likely did. Shiomi shook off any doubts. As the originator of modern Magecraft, casting high-tier forbidden Magecraft like reality marbles would be second nature to him. He might even have something beyond that. Sensing the severity of what lay ahead, Shiomi instinctively enhanced his mana circulation. The bluish-black magic spear in his hand flew forward, hovering in midair deep within the forest. I'll leave it to you, Morgan, Shiomi said. Without hesitation, Morgan reached out and touched the spear. In an instant, it vanished. splitting into countless smaller weapons that flew into the forest, targeting the demons as they awaited their next opening. But that was only the distraction. Xiaomi summoned a more suitable weapon, Gaibolg alternative. Then, with a sudden strike, he slashed the cold earth before him with the spear's blade. From the crack, vines erupted wildly, spreading outward from the fissure and rapidly snaking through the forest, consuming the terrain. The demons, realizing they would be ensnared by Xiaomi's plant-based magecraft if they remained on the ground, leapt into the air. Only to be met with Morgan's attacks from above. Caught in a deadly pincer, Xiaomi ignited the vines at that moment, setting off an even greater explosion. Flames shot up nearly 10 meters high from the once pristine forest. Xiaomi wasn't concerned about the fire spreading unchecked. He had already laid down a containment barrier of ice magecraft during the battle to keep it under control. Within the raging fire, smoke and ash billowed. One demon god waved his banner, and the blaze gradually weakened. The snake-tailed demon conjured a strong gust of wind, dispersing the smoke that clouded their vision. But where there had been two enemies moments ago, there was now nothing. Only a little farther down the path stood a car, engine silent, waiting quietly. A feint. Xiaomi and Morgan had appeared to launch a coordinated frontal assault using magecraft, aiming to overwhelm and eliminate the four demon pillars. But after disrupting the enemy's senses, they swiftly broke away from the skirmish, leaving the demons behind and heading straight for the ghostly mansion hidden deep within the forest. As they dashed through the woods, Xiaomi wrapped one arm around Morgan's waist while slashing through obstructing branches with the magic spear in his other hand, carving a clear path forward. They're just four of the demon pillars. Strong enough to match servants, sure. But if it's you and me together, we could have taken them all out, Morgan said. It's a matter of time, Xiaomi shook his head. We're already late. I'm betting Lancer and his master are fighting Castor's camp right now. I can't be sure whether Lancer will hold out longer, or whether we could have finished those four faster. He is your senior, after all. There's that tale of him fighting for days before finally falling. Even against the king of magecraft, he should be able to last half a day, Morgan offered reassuringly. If you went all out against Lancer, how long would it take to finish the fight? Xiaomi asked. Hard to say. Probably a bit longer than it took with Dairmudadu. Morgan paused to think. That's about the best comparison I can give. 10 years ago at the Hyatt Hotel, Morgan had effortlessly used 5 of her clones to heavily wound Dairmud. Though he managed to hold on for a few minutes, he was eventually forced out of the fight. Would it take half a day? No, Morgan whispered into Xiaomi's ear. If my husband asked me sweetly, it wouldn't take more than 20 minutes to kill Ku Chilane. After all, even Prey puts up a fight. Then that sounds about right. Xiaomi nodded. Maybe it's just me, but I can't sense any passion from the king of magecraft. He's the magus of Magi. It might have sounded like stating the obvious, but it was the only way he could describe Castor. That man radiated the very essence of a magus. Someone who prioritized results, used the fastest, most effective methods, and never mixed emotion into the equation. If Marisberry had ordered Castor to eliminate Lancer's faction swiftly, then Castor would do just that. Without arrogance or theatrics, without glorifying the fight. The more stubborn Lancer appeared, the more decisively Castor would escalate, ending it as quickly as possible. Pretty sharp of you. Morgan murmured. Before Xiaomi could reply, 2 powerful surges of mana erupted ahead of them. Each stronger than the last. One of them, Xiaomi recognized immediately. It was Gaibolg's mana signature, released in its true name state. The other. They've clashed with noble phantasms. Xiaomi broke into a sprint. The edge of the forest was just ahead. But he had to stop there, raising a defensive spell with Morgan as a massive shockwave swept through the trees. When the light finally faded, Xiaomi saw it. The once grand mansion lay in ruins. And Lancer was collapsed at the foot of the front steps. Chapter 175, Damn. Bastard. Lancer braced himself with his spear and slowly stood up, breathing heavily as he stared at Castor. He still didn't know who this servant was, but the massive surge of mana Castor had just unleashed had engulfed the entire mansion grounds. Bazit, still not fully recovered from her injuries, was knocked unconscious again by the blast. Unable to even use her prized noble phantasm. Since Castor hadn't activated his own noble phantasm, Fragrock hadn't been able to trigger. The sheer force of Castor's magecraft alone rivaled the true name release of a noble phantasm. Lancer knew this was a battle he couldn't win. But at least it wasn't an unfair loss. Castor's master had clearly made thorough preparations to summon such a powerful servant. He coughed up another mouthful of blood at the thought. The fight was lost. But that didn't mean Lancer would give up. Bazit was still alive. He had to make sure she stayed that way. Just then, 2 shadows shot out from the forest behind Castor. Fierce winds morphed into blades, layering over each other like a net and sweeping toward Castor. But the earth beneath his feet rose instinctively, forming a solid wall that blocked every wind blade with ease. When Lancer got a clear look at the new arrivals, he gave a dry, irritated laugh. "Took you long enough. I almost thought you'd teamed up with Castor," he said. "I think we were pretty fast." "Castor was just faster," Shiomi replied, lifting both spears and leveling them at Castor. "No wonder they call you the one with eyes that see past and future. You tracked us down this quickly." Morgan pointed his magic spear at Castor, her tone icy. "Not a speck of dust on you." Despite the intensity of the battle, Castor truly looked untouched. Like he'd just stepped onto the battlefield, his condition still pristine. The cold wind hadn't let up, and the 4 pillars of evil that had been repelled earlier now began to reappear, one after another, from the forest, 3 against 5. "Definitely a disadvantage," Lancer said as he walked over to stand on Shiomi's other side. "You'd better be ready to die. Otherwise, you're just going to die here." Shiomi aimed his spear at Castor. "We'll die. But we'll make sure Castor doesn't leave." "Sounds nice, but I'd rather he be the only one buried with my husband," Morgan said lightly, but the aura she gave off was fierce. Completely focused on the enemy before her. "Hey. Then I'll make sure to drag the enemy far away before I die," Lancer joked with a grin. "Wouldn't want to get in your way." At that moment, Castor raised his head slightly, as if he'd heard someone speak. For the first time, the unchanging expression on his face shifted. Just a little. A flicker of wistfulness crossed it, like there was something he had wanted to do but never could. "All right. We'll retreat for now." With that quiet murmur, Castor turned around. Surrounded by the 4 pillars of evil, he vanished into the forest. TCH. Castor's master sure plays it safe. Lancer slowly lowered his spear and spat out the blood in his mouth, clearly frustrated. Shiomi gave it some thought. "Maybe they're just trying not to reveal too much of their strength here?" "Maybe," Morgan said, easing her stance. "Or maybe Castor's master already knows who you are. And they're wary of you. Wouldn't be surprising. I am from the land of shadows, after all." As he spoke, he turned to look at Lancer, only to see the blue-clad figure collapse backward. The red spear he had gripped so tightly slipped from his hand and rolled to the ground. "Hey." Shiomi quickly crouched down to check on Lancer's condition. "Haha. Looks like this is it." Lancer let out a couple of weak laughs, breathing heavily. What a troublesome servant. As a magus, even Master might not be able to match him. "You're not saying you already." Shiomi released his mana to try and heal him, but immediately realized that Lancer's spirit core was damaged. The only reason he'd been able to stand and face off against Castor was likely due to a battle continuation type skill. "That guy's magecraft is practically on par with a noble phantasm," Lancer sighed. "And he countered me right after I released mine. Who the hell is he?" Rather than dwelling on his own bitter defeat, Lancer seemed more concerned with Castor's identity. "The king of magecraft. His name is Solomon." Shiomi hesitated for a moment, then revealed Castor's true name. Lancer's eyes widened. Then he let out a series of helpless but hearty laughs. "Well, no wonder we couldn't beat him. That kind of opponent," Lancer said. "I may have studied magecraft under my master, but I'm probably not even as good as you." Shiomi looked at him silently, neither confirming nor denying it. "But damn, it was over way too fast. I didn't even get the chance to go another round with my junior." Lancer closed his eyes, clearly frustrated. "Didn't have any real wishes, but now I get to disappear with regrets." Shiomi looked at Kuchilane and couldn't help but chuckle. "You're really too much of a battle junkie." "As if you're not," Kuchilane shot back with a grin. His body had begun dissolving into motes of magical light. A clear sign he was fading. "Hey, tell me. Do you have a thing for our master?" "Good guess," Shiomi muttered, lips tightening. "Wait, don't tell me you actually." Lancer teased. Shiomi frowned. "Keep going and I'll personally send you off right now." Startled and half laughing in alarm, Lancer suddenly burst into laughter that echoed through the forest. "Ha ha 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 ha. Now that's something. Guess I really have no choice but to hand over the title of first disciple. It just wouldn't feel right otherwise. TCH. Cough, cough." The laughing took too much out of him. Lancer lay there, staring up at the winter sky. "Hey. Could I ask you to take care of Bazet? Whether it's the association or the church, just get her somewhere safe." As he spoke, Morgan, who had gone off to assess the situation, returned carrying the unconscious Bazet in her arms. "Got it. I'll handle the rest," Shiomi replied. "Senpai." All right." Lancer struggled to raise his hand, gave Shiomi a thumbs up, and with a bright smile, vanished. Shiomi remained crouched for a moment longer, waiting until Lancer's presence completely faded. Then, with a sigh, he slowly stood up. "Let's go. To the church." Morgan replied softly. Chapter 176, That's unexpected. It's only been a day. Don't tell me you've already taken down Assassin? Pushing open the church doors, Seal looked at Shiomi and Morgan from her place at the altar, visibly surprised. That's not possible. Doesn't the church have a spirit board to track servant summonings? Shiomi shook his head, denying her assumption. The spirit board only confirms whether all the servant slots are filled. It doesn't track when they're defeated, Seal replied, her gaze shifting to the person in Morgan's arms. So, what brings you two here? Lancer has fallen, Shiomi said. She's Lancer's master. Bazit Frogem Kremitz, a combatant sent by the Mages Association. Seal's expression showed a flicker of surprise before she pieced the situation together. Judging from that, I take it neither of you were the ones who defeated Lancer, she said. Bazit has lost her combat capability. Her injuries are severe. As a fellow Clock Tower Magus, I'd like to request the church's aid in treating her, Shiomi said. Of course, Seal agreed without hesitation. Providing refuge for masters who've lost their servants is one of the church's responsibilities. Still, I didn't expect you to let an opponent go, Mr. Shiomi. After all, under normal circumstances, even if a servant lost their master, staying in Fuiuki meant they weren't completely out of the war. If another servant lost their master, a new contract could be formed, and the battle would continue. There was no need for that. I'm not here for the Holy Grail, Shiomi replied calmly. Besides, her injuries are severe. Even with the protection of a magic crest, she's not going to recover anytime soon. Just teasing, Seal said with a slight smile as she walked over and took Bazit from Morgan. She's definitely in bad shape. I'll take her to the back for treatment. If there's nothing else, make yourselves at home. Shiomi watched as Seal carried Bazit behind the altar, then found a chair nearby and sat down, with only the aisle separating him from Morgan. The church was empty now. No need to raise their voices to be heard. We were outplayed, Morgan said. Caster's side likely predicted you'd try to rally other camps and preemptively moved against Lancer. Maybe. Bazit is a sealing designation executor. Her combat ability as a master is hardly lacking. And in the last Holy Grail War, a lord died from lack of field experience. In that case, it wouldn't be strange for Mer Isberry to act more cautiously. The lord of the Department of Astromancy hadn't shown himself at all, merely observing the battlefield through Magecraft. Shiomi understood. If he had the King of Magecraft as his servant, he might hesitate to step onto the front lines too. Reaping what we sow? Morgan teased. Hard to say, Shiomi replied. The plan's fallen apart. We'll need to rethink our next move. Lancer's defeat meant Mer Isberry would soon begin to act as well. The Holy Grail War didn't wait for anyone. As long as they stayed out of sight of ordinary people, battles could break out even in broad daylight. With that thought, Shiomi looked up. What is it? I'm thinking Caster's next target might be the Innsburn, Shiomi said. Then there was Assassin, still unaccounted for. Clearly still operating in the shadows. Once word got out about Lancer's fall, things would only get more unpredictable. Is there a way to locate Caster's workshop? Shiomi asked. If we'd been tracking them from the beginning, sure, Morgan replied. But doing it without Caster noticing? As far as I know, no one has that kind of skill. It was a basic truth. Most magi couldn't even track a caster to begin with. Then, Shiomi started to ask. By the time my husband was helping with the injured, Morgan said bluntly, they were already on the move. The tracking magic she cast on Caster had already stopped returning feedback. The possibility that they were still at the same location could be ruled out. That only left one explanation. Caster had severed the tracking. But you volunteered to help carry Bazit. Shiomi thought she was blaming him for being indecisive and missing the window to act. Even if I hadn't helped, my husband wouldn't have refused a request from his senior, Morgan said with a knowing look, though her tone was calm. She meant that all she'd done was what Shiomi had intended to do anyway. Caster or assassin? Shiomi nodded, then fell into thought. He was caught in a mild dilemma. According to Seal, Assassin had already attacked Ryder's master. So Ryder would likely be focused on retaliating.